Before we start, could I just advise that I have to be absent this afternoon for a period to attend a medical appointment?
Thank you very much for reminding us of that. Who wishes to speak on the proposition of the Conotab? Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Conotab of Greville.
Yes, sir. Primarily, I think that most people understand that in major cities, the closer to the centre of any city, the few private owners have vehicles of their own because their transport systems are second to none. My son lives in the outer London area. He doesn't have a car. He uses public transport. They have a wonderful train system, lots of buses at the end of the road taking them wherever they wish to go. And therefore, there's actually no actual requirement to have a vehicle of your own. And I'm sure if my colleagues behind me and around me had the sort of buses and bus service that they have in St Helier, a lot of people in the countryside wouldn't need a car either, sir. And that's the reason why I think I'm going to vote against this, is because if we had a better transport system throughout the island, a lot of us wouldn't need cars either. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conotab. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I'll follow the Conotab of Greville by making a similar point, but maybe in a different vein. That actually, for people who live in town to get out of town to enjoy some of the benefits of our island, it's actually quite a struggle. Jersey is an island. We have a great deal of water sports. And I don't know if anybody's tried carrying a longboard onto one of the buses to take us out to St Wanda Bay to go surfing, but it's not that conveniently done, unfortunately. That's not to say that I disagree with the Minister's planning guidance for the island, but I believe, and maybe slightly where I disagree with the Constable, that we should be waiting for a parking strategy, but we do need a better sustainable transport policy for the island. And I did mention during the briefing we had on the supplementary planning guidance that I do believe that this is slightly cart before the horse, as in we are trying to get rid of people's use of the car by removing the parking before a formal and good quality strategy of alternatives have been brought before us. So it is a little bit, I am still a little bit undecided on which way to go with this, because I understand the Constable's desire to make sure that people are adequately provided for within the district that I represent, but I also understand the Minister's position of we do need to remove the reliance on the car as an individual person's ownership and only method of transport. So I will leave that there, really, that we do need a sustainable transport policy as well as a sustainable parking strategy, as well as reducing the need for people to be able to park their own car.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member, you're on board?
Thank you, sir. I'll speak now. Just pick up on something that Deputy Coles had said there about the cart before the horse. The reality is, and the Constable knows, and we all know, that we cannot sustain the level of car use on this island. We simply cannot continue to build spaces for cars when we develop our housing. But there's a problem, because there is a massive inequity in where we're building, what we're building, and what we're leaving behind when we build. And as a representative of St Helier and Central St Helier, we're taking the brunt of this. And this, what I would suggest is really unthought about implications of what's being built and why. So many homes, and I'm not, please can we use the words, I'd ask for the Assembly, homes rather than properties. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. We're building people's homes. And with a home goes so many things. The quality of what's inside, its accessibility, how you transport yourself, how, if you're a young family, how do you get the pram into the house, for example. And we never think about these subtleties because, to be quite frank, sir, the majority of the people in this Assembly aren't living in these conditions, in these homes. We're lucky. And I come back to what the Constable's trying to do here, and he knows, I know there's an issue with the number of cars. We can't have a car each in the centre of town. But there's an issue. And until we sort out some sort of sustainable method of transport, as was mentioned by the Deputy Coles, we are in a catch-22 situation. And unfortunately, sir, I have come to a conclusion in my mind, which is that if we are saying, well, we can make these supplementary changes to car parking and then something will happen later on, I'm afraid, sir, I simply do not believe that the strategy needs to change our method of transport around the island and around St Helier will ever appear. It hasn't in the past. And let me ask this, sir, to the government. If I was to bring a proposition to say, I'll tell you what, for residents of the centre of St Helier, we will provide a free shuttle bus from areas of, thought about areas where we've consulted with local residents, say where do you want to go from and to, what would you use, when would you use it, what's the most frequent times, what can we do to stop you using a car, and then we will provide it for you for free at your point of use and access. I guarantee, sir, that this Assembly and certainly this government would vote against it. They would vote against it because they're anti-public transport in that way. But so therefore, what this Assembly wants, or what this government seems to want, is it's cake and eat it, or it's car and it's van. It wants to say, everyone should have a car, it's fine, but you can't have them in St Helier, and we're going to do nothing else to support that. And yes, of course, we can give some subsidies for electric bikes, £3,000 electric bike. I'm sure I was overwhelmed, sir, by the constituents dropping into my assembly, coming from their second job to make ends meet and pay their rent, to say, how do I apply for this £3,000 bike grant? Because I want to invest the £3,000 I just got laid in the bank. I've taken it out of the bank because if income supports it, I have an overpayment. The systems that we've got in place are simply not addressing where the need is. And it might be great for those people who've got the money and got the choice and can say, well, I'm going to stop using my car and I've got my electric bike and that's brilliant, it's absolutely fantastic and those are needed and that's great. But in St Helier, in town, that's not what's happening. We've not had a joined up policy. We had to fight for the town hopper bus, which isn't going to work, and it doesn't work because we're paying a fare which is completely disproportionate for the distances travelled. It is a token gesture so we can tick a box. And until there is a strategy which is actually going to allow people to travel in that way, and there are St Helier deputies who voted against a free bus to go to Springfield for a trial for people who are using the gym. And then we're sold, oh, but we can have a extra planning policy which is going to limit the number of parking spaces. It's not going to work. You're just going to end up with an absolute... you're never going to make the shifts that you need until you have something else. And what this proposition seems to say to me that it's going to do, and the constable can correct me if I'm wrong, if I can just get it open, which I can't, it does seem to say that this is going to postpone the supplementary guidance until next March so that we have some sort of policy in place beforehand. I have no problem with supporting that because it's not saying, oh, don't have it. It's saying, let's have it joined up. Let's have it thought through. Let's have it saying that if I want to say to Deputy Ward, we want you to not have a car in town. And these are the methods of transport that you can use beyond getting an electric bike. Beyond paying £50 a month for a bus pass, or however many £100 a year for a bus pass. Beyond which, for a service that perhaps isn't as regular as you want, and actually is going to take you to the bus station, you're going to be walking anyway. Some sort of service by which we can actually transport out the things around that we want to transport. I will mention, sir, because no one else does in this assembly, it seems. What do people like musicians do if they want to transport their stuff around? Because that's not in bus hours. And you can't take a drum kit on a bus. It's really, really difficult. So what are we going to do? And we need a strategy for that. We need a sensible, intelligent strategy, and there isn't one. We don't have a sustainable transport strategy. We have a policy which is just words. What was the transport policy before? You could turn right out of the bus station and we build some bus stop shelters. That's not a sustainable bus strategy. And there are members of government and assistant ministers who are just anti-public transport. openly anti-public transport, anti-bike, anti-pedestrian. And I say that publicly because I mean it, sir. Because we're not seeing the support that we need. And so until we come up with that sort of meaningful strategy, and until this Assembly is willing to do something like support a trial in the centre of town which will give free transport around town, so that people can use that as their go-to means of transport, then I'm not supporting the implementation of a strategy that would just limit the ability for St Helier. And as for let's talk about the climate change part of it, shall we? We're not doing enough on that anyway. We're simply not. It's become a token gesture, and the attitude, it seems to be, of government is we're too small to matter. You've fallen for it. We've fallen for the argument. The JEP articles, we're too small to matter, we can't impact on it. Let's not stop investing in fossil fuels, because that's the way of our future. Well, that's a complete and utter load of nonsense, sir. So until we come up with something, and I do talk passionately about this because I'm absolutely fed up with being in the centre of St Helier and seeing people use their car, and then I can't say to them, don't use your car, because they haven't got an alternative. They simply don't have an alternative. And so I was lucky enough, and the best way to buy an electric car, by the way, is get one on interest-free credit. Some of the places are doing it because it's a really good deal at the moment, so. You're not paying interest rates are going up. You don't need a subsidy for an electric car. That's not going to help anyone because you haven't got the money up front anyway. And then you can run that electric car and you get free parking for a year. It's a brilliant incentive to bring your car into town and park it in town. Fantastic incentive. It works. People will all bring their electric cars and park them in town. And again, another disjointed approach to what we're going to do with our transport. The secret here is public transport, free at the point of use to everybody on this island. And until as an island we wake up to that, everything we do is tinkering. So I'm going to support the Constable this time and say, unless you come up with a strategy, this supplementary guidance is going to do nothing, absolutely nothing for St Helier. And some of my friends will say to me, Rob, what are you doing there? And I'll explain to them again. We need a system of alternatives that we don't actually have. So bring that first. And then I will support you in whatever you want to do about parking in town. But we haven't got that system first. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Lutz.
Thank you, sir. I hadn't intended to speak, and I've scribbled some notes that I realise I can't read now, but I will attempt to say just a few words, sir. The first thing is that whether the Assembly votes for this or not, it will make, in the short term, very little difference. We have waited, somebody said, over a decade. I think it's actually quite a bit longer than that. Ever since I can remember, we've been promised parking strategies. So whether this goes ahead or not, might just be a few more months on the end of those decades that we've waited. The next thing I want to say is that whether we have this new supplementary planning guidance or not, those people who make adjudications on planning applications in the middle of St Helier are already following a sort of a code, if you like, that says if you apply in the middle of town, you will probably have less parking with that. And certainly when it comes to offers or recommendations on applications, I think I'm right in saying that you're far more likely to get something approved without parking in the middle of town than you would elsewhere. So we're already implementing some parts of this proposed supplementary planning guidance. But the reason I got to my feet and scribbled notes I couldn't read, sir, was because I heard from Deputy Ward that we're doing nothing. There's no strategy, there's no plan, we're doing nothing for St Helier. But all I would say to him is that every large-scale application for houses that's come in St Helier in recent times has come along with a planning obligation for a car club, an electric car club, and the one I'm thinking of most recently will be a string of cars parked outside on the road, ready for the occupants of that housing development to use when they need it. And all I would say to members is this is the way things are going. In the future, we won't own our own car, we will share cars. That doesn't mean to say we'll use them less, they'll just get used more in a better way. But to say that we're doing nothing in town isn't strictly right, because we are pushing hard through the planning application process for sustainable transport and for these large developments to have an obligation, a legal obligation to sign up to car clubs so those people who live in there have access to cars when they need them, and those cars are electric, and that's the way things are going. That's all I'd have to say, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. And please can I say welcome back to the Chief Minister, and that we have missed you, and it's very nice to have you back. My comments, I just want to say I do understand what the Constable of St Helier is saying, and I think perhaps we all are forgetting the very many good people who serve this island as electricians and plumbers and carpenters who need their transport to come and help all of us out when we have a problem, and this island wouldn't manage without them, and they are having a real job finding somewhere to park their vans and their lorries, and they haven't got anywhere. It's very hard in some of the new developments for that to happen, and they're having to share, and I just wanted to point that out to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. So the Constable bases his argument on a claim that the supplementary planning guidance that I sent out is discriminatory and unfair. And I'm going to argue in this contribution that I don't think it is, and explain that, in fact, I think that's a somewhat absurd claim. But let me talk first about the draft supplementary planning guidance on residential parking standards that I'm being asked to pause. What is it that is causing all the trouble? The SPG has been brought forward for a number of reasons, but without doubt the prime reason is because it is a vital part of the planning framework when it comes to new housing developments. A second crucial reason is that the current guidance is woefully out of date. And I'm going to tease out some of the implications of those two statements because they make it clear why pausing would be such a bad idea. Members will be aware that over the last 9 months or so, I've been bringing forward supplementary planning guidance relating to a number of policy areas that are critical in planning new developments. These include SPG on residential space standards, density standards, and parking standards. When an architect sits down to plan a new development, they need some basic information. What density of development must they meet? How big should the accommodation units be? And how much space needs to be given up to other uses, such as parking? These parameters are fundamental to the design of any new housing scheme, and that is why I've been so determined to bring forward supplementary planning guidance that addresses them. Indeed, it is my great regret that they have not come forward sooner. These areas of policy guidance are the bedrock, the starting point for any new development. They also underpin a further piece of supplementary planning guidance relating to new housing, the rezoned housing sites. Therefore, it is pretty clear that parking is a key part of the matrix of requirements, and pausing it would have major implications. But there's a further critical point in relation to these three pieces of SPG. All three forms of guidance interact. Just pressed the wrong button on my speech. For example, we have made improvements to residential space standards by increasing the minimum size of rooms and providing a little more storage and so on. Not huge increases, but incremental improvements. Nevertheless, these impose costs on developers that on their own might prove onerous. They get slightly fewer units per development site because each unit is slightly larger. However, these losses can be, to some extent, be offset if less parking is provided. In other words, if we pause the planning guidance on parking, we effectively stall the basis of new housing developments across the island. No developer is going to want to bring forward a scheme without having all three pieces of planning guidance in place. Otherwise, they will be working only with the enhanced residential space standards without access to the counterbalancing guide on parking. I would remind the Assembly of the oral question that was asked 2 days ago by Deputy Mezek. It concerned my failure to bring forward SPG relating to policy H6 in the Island Plan, the policy that would activate the requirement for developers of sites with greater than 50 homes. And as I said, that delay is something I profoundly regret. But in that context, I'm not prepared to add further entirely unnecessary delay to the provision of planning guidance that is so desperately needed by the development industry. This government has a relentless focus on housing. Pausing this planning guidance serves only to delay vitally needed housing provision, and for no good reason, as I'll explain in a moment. Let me move on to the need for new parking standards, just why this new parking guidance is so desperately needed and why it would be entirely inappropriate to simply let the existing guidance continue in operation as the Constable has suggested. So the previous guidance on parking dates from 1988. It is ludicrously out of date. Indeed, it is a regular feature of reports by planning inspectors when commenting on planning appeals that they're being asked to judge wildly contradictory policies regarding parking. On the one hand, they have the Sustainable Transport Policy, the Bridging Island Plan, and the Carbon Neutral Roadmap that all prioritise sustainable transport and a reduction of car use. On the other, they have the archaic guidance from 1988 that dates from a predict and provide world when the essential attitude was to provide as much car parking as possible. What does the old guidance look like? A couple of examples of how it would work if it were applied today in the form in which it currently exists. A development which provided 5 new flats, let's say 2 3-beds and 3 1-bed, somewhere like Great Union Road. That would need to provide a minimum of 6 spaces on site, plus 1 visitor space. That is what would happen if we strictly applied the existing guidance, which the Constable would like us to keep in place. The development of 10 3-bed family homes in St Clement would need to provide a minimum of 20 spaces, plus 2 or 3 visitor spaces. The same parking allocation would be required if that same development were to happen in St One, in the urban area, in St One. And in each case, there would be no requirement for cycle parking or electric vehicle charging points to be provided. That is how out of date the current guidance is. That is why we cannot carry on under that system. That is why we need new supplementary planning guidance. It's also the case that the application of this process would lead to massive over-provision of parking and under-provision, of course, of vital new transport infrastructure such as electric car provision, charging points and so on. We know the current guidance leads to over-provision of parking because we have over-provided parking up to now, particularly in town. And we know because Andium have car parks that are not fully utilised. They have empty, unused car parking spaces. Now, it's actually proved useful in a short term in the way that EV have been able to use some of those car parking spaces for their purposes. But nevertheless, we have a surplus. Now, I agree with the Constable that we can make better use of the parking that exists, and a parking strategy would help us unlock some potential gains. We shouldn't have those empty car parking spaces. But they exist because of the old parking guidance being followed and delivering car parking spaces that people no longer need. People's lives, as Deputy Luce has said, have moved on. People use vehicles in different ways. So in terms of residential parking standards, we need to move on. The parking guidance that I have put out for consultation responds to the Sustainable Transport Policy, the Bridging Island Plan, and the Carbon Neutral Roadmap. It is entirely consistent with the flow of all our planning policy relating to parking. So what does the new guidance look like? Bear in mind that this is draft guidance still being considered, so the details may change. But as it currently stands, in the limited area of the town centre only, what's known as the Town Centre Sustainable Transport Zone, the draft standards allow developers to determine whether they want to provide car parking spaces as part of their development proposals, up to a maximum of 1 space per home. Therefore, it is possible they could propose a home with no parking. They could. Don't have to, but they could. The obvious qualifier is that developers will only build homes that they know that people want. The current draft guidance provides the option for islanders with choice. Some developments without parking for those who don't need a car, but retaining the option of adding parking spaces in other developments. That policy only applies in the centre of town, the town centre sustainable transport zone. For the remainder of the town of St Helier, as with the rest of the island, the draft guidance sets out a minimum requirement for the provision of car parking space, such that a minimum level of car parking has to be provided, which varies depending on the size of the home and the zone in which development is taking place. In other words, it is not discriminatory against St Helier because it applies to all the built-up areas. The minimum level of car parking provision is based on what other transport choices might be available to islands in different parts of the island. So let me turn to the question of discrimination or unfairness against St Helier. Discrimination is defined as the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people. And I would say in no way does the parking guidance fall into this category. The island plan is built on spatial policy. In other words, different parts of the island are identified as being more or less suitable for different forms of development. That is the whole basis of planning policy. It is intrinsic that different parts of the island have different policies applied to them. Denser forms of development in town than in the countryside, for example. Retail development concentrated in the built-up areas, with a particular focus on the centre of town. Now, you can agree or disagree with these policies, but they're not discrimination. They are a result of carefully considered spatial policy built up over decades and the result of exhaustive consultation over many island plan cycles. And I have to say, therefore, that it is not the aim of planning policy to give people in the centre of St Helier exactly the same access to private parking provision as might be applicable in the countryside. I think that would be absurd. Parking provision is less in the very centre of St Helier because the private parking provision, that is in new developments, would be less in the very centre of St Helier because it has the best access to sustainable transport options, most notably the bus service, which I am not anti-bus service, I'm very much pro, but also car clubs. It is also possible to walk to many shops and services that in other parts of the island would require a car. But we are not banning the provision of car parking in developments in the centre of town. It is still available as an option. This is not discrimination. It is planning policy built on a sensible approach to the use of space. In the same way as it's not discrimination that residents of St Helier have access to buses leaving to all parts of the island, whereas there's only a bus service for every hour or two to Corbière or Latac. The policy responds to the lower density of population in remote areas compared to town. Residential parking standards that I have proposed respond to the realities on the ground. So it may be that the Constable really believes that parking provision should be the same in the heart of town as it is in the countryside, in which case I do not agree, and I invite members to agree with me that this is not a reasonable conclusion. The policy guidance I have proposed is not anti-car ownership, it is not anti the residents of town or any one part of town. Let's move on to the parking strategy finally. The proposition calls for us to wait for a parking strategy. As part of the sustainable transport policy, my colleague, the Minister for Infrastructure, is working on a parking plan. That's because it's called that because I think that's what it was called in the sustainable transport policy. And that, I know, has several work streams. This is important work, and here I have some sympathy with the Constable. We do need to look at how we approach parking in a broader way. We do need to look at the interaction between residential, on-street and public parking. And I know that my colleague, the Minister for Infrastructure, is working on this, and both he and I are very open to discussions. We would be very happy to meet and discuss the wider parking issues relating to St Helier and discuss how that parking plan should evolve. But I say it is madness to pause planning guidance on parking standards for residential developments whilst that work carries on. Especially because in terms of residential parking standards, there is little possibility that this plan will conclude in general terms anything other than what the Sustainable Transport Policy, the Carbon Neutral Roadmap, the Island Plan and the draft SPG have already concluded, namely that policy guidance for those most sustainable locations, such as the centre of town, should have lower private parking provision in new developments. Not none, just lower. So finally, this Assembly has made some great progress in terms of its commitment to sustainable transport, and it was rather disappointing to hear Deputy Ward be so disparaging. Through the Carbon Neutral Roadmap, the Sustainable Transport Policy and the Bridging Island Plan, we actually have a very good example of joined up government. The policies align. They reinforce each other. The only outlier left is the old residential parking standard guidance. And my new draft guidance addresses that defect. So Deputy Ward says that we're not making progress on carbon reduction, and yet his first response to this is to stop the policies that will actually start to deliver that carbon reduction. I say to this Assembly that if we are ever to deliver on our commitments to sustainable transport, we need to keep our focus. We need to start delivering on our ambitions to reduce car use, and we are. We're doing that through the e-bike support scheme. We're working on a shared transport scheme, and there are other measures to follow. Reducing the requirement for private parking provision in the very centre of town is a reasonable, proportionate part of the toolbox when it comes to driving the change we need. We can't have a situation where we can't do anything unless we can do everything. And we have to remember that planning policy isn't just for today. Deputy Coles talked about the cart before the horse. We have to move forward. It's irrelevant which bit we put first. We have to keep moving forward. Planning policy is for tomorrow, for the next few years, and indeed decades, because that is how long the developments that we have built now will last. And to Deputy Luce's point, the world is changing. We need our planning guidance now to respond to the changes that we can see are already happening. We cannot make the same mistake we made in the past and over-provide when we are moving in the direction of reducing car use. If we were to pass this proposition, we would be pausing supplementary planning guidance to develop a parking strategy whose broad direction has already been set. We would be bringing a large chunk of the development industry to a halt. The SPG does not ban developments from having private car parking. It responds flexibly to different contexts. The exact guidance has not yet been determined, but I cannot accept that we delay its production further. We can't go on delaying and delaying and delaying. Please reject this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I have immense sympathy for Constable, the Constable's proposition. When I was hearing the Minister for Environment's speech, I started feeling that kind of feeling of alarm that I've had before when the actual contents of this SPG was being described, because I started thinking, is that a new policy or is that a guidance? Seemed to have been here before talking about this in the context of the density guidelines, not policies, although we understood from the Solicitor General in that conversation that that could be an actual whole subject to a judicial review. So, there's a wider discussion here just about the way in which planning instruments are being formed generally and at this moment in time. But particularly with the changes that happened around COVID and the use in which Article 6 of the planning law is now being used to support SPG being issued by the Minister, that the States Assembly cannot actually, isn't really actually consulted, doesn't have to be presented to the States Assembly and approved. And I accept that has been some outdated planning guidance, and yet at the same time, what I've seen even in St Brelard has been, well, it's all about these wildly contradictory policies, isn't it? That I actually saw a whole restaurant's car park, relatively under served area of the island in terms of car parking. I saw a restaurant basically a developer halving the car parking available to restaurant to build houses on it, because that was so much more important than providing a restaurant with provision for its customers in that way. And of course that put more pressure on the public car parks. And so I can see, yes, we do probably need an overall parking strategy. I mean, and when I've heard about the sizing, I mean, the constables mentioned what happened with the brewery site and the limitations there. I'm thinking, on the other hand, we've got an aged population, haven't we? I mean, it's actually saying, right, okay, you each have a space and then there'll be one visitor space, but you know, and that's actually generous compared to some of these developments, when in fact you've got people who perhaps really do need to have transport. Perhaps it could be electric cars. Maybe that's not, if they were electric cars, it would be more acceptable to the minister. Those visitors, those more elderly people may well need more in the way of health visitors, carers coming, and therefore car parking spaces there. And Deputy Howe again has made this point about workmen. And indeed, yes, again in St Brelard, in St Oban, I come across this being a real problem for workmen. These spaces, there is a shortage of these spaces. So, I mean, I'm glad to hear that there is work being done on this parking plan. But, well, here's another thing. We're going to be working on the St Brelard improvement plan soon. Well, you know, when we talk about planning, what allowances will we be making for these spaces? We're just going to rely on an SPG? So I'm interested to hear more to see why I should be supporting an SPG before an overall parking strategy. But it does raise so many questions, what I keep seeing in so many different areas about how government produces policy altogether. It just seems to be, it's a bit like tidying a blanket, let's put it this way, let's put it that way, rather than producing something that is an actual wholesale solution to a problem, bringing in these different strands, such as the ageing population, such as the fact that restaurants may well need a certain amount of parking and all the implications there, and the fact that we may well be seeing a future where we do have more in the way of vehicles that are more friendly in terms of the climate. And then one point I would also mention is that in some jurisdictions, in public car parks, there is preferred parking for electric cars. Might we not have that here? Just some of these thoughts that make me think, yeah, I sort of understand where the constable's coming from. So I look forward to Deputy Binay's speech, which perhaps may make me feel a bit more comfortable about my voting position.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to begin by thanking the Constable of St Helier as one of his constituents for bringing this proposition. As I do represent and live in St Helier Central, it is something that is actually of great interest to me and importance, I know, to my constituents. And I have to say, I did feel somewhat condescended by the speech made by the Minister for Environment. I think it's all very well for people who represent other parishes and live in other parishes to talk about the needs and wants of people living in St Helier. But that's what I'm here to do, and that's what I will do. I would like to thank Deputy Howell actually for her mentioning of the need for people parking white vans. I do know that a number of my constituents happen to run businesses and do rely on town parking to park their vans. The reason why I think the Constable is quite right in requesting this parking strategy is because further increase in dwellings and decrease in parking that goes with those dwellings is only going to further exacerbate the issues that currently are faced by my constituents. Deputy Luce mentioned that driving is changing and that there are things called car clubs. I want to talk a little bit about my experience as a resident of St Helier, both living in an apartment block which had ample parking for residents but no visitor spaces, in which I was fortunate enough to have 2 parking spaces in the underground car park. Without having those 2 parking spaces, my elderly mother would not have been able to visit me because there was no visitor parking for that particular block. When I moved into further central St Helier and moved to a house without parking, my husband and I considered at great length whether we actually required a car or not. We looked at the provision of the carpooling, the car clubs that Deputy Luce mentioned, and then we thought about the things that we require our car for on a weekly basis. And just thinking back to this last weekend, the things we used our car for was a visit to the recycling centre. We could have maybe gone and got an EV van, tried to find a parking space on our residential street. We're still waiting for a residential parking permit, so actually we'd been parking illegally there. Potentially could have faced a fine. We wouldn't have been able to sit my daughter in that EV van because the EV van only has 2 seats. The other thing that we use is the car for is to do our weekly shop. There currently isn't provision readily for easily obtainable online shopping. I know the Co-op do offer a service, but actually for many families the easiest way is to get in the car. I'm sure most members, that's what you do. Again, if I'd have used one of the carpooling initiatives, I could have used one of the cars. The boots are very small, and again, they only have 2 seats, the ones near me anyway. The other things I did was take my daughter to children's activities. Had I wanted to take my daughter to the party she was going to at Jersey Bowl, I would have had to walk 25 minutes to the bus station, wait for the bus, and then take her up to the party. I would have then been stuck at the party and I wouldn't have been able to visit my elderly mother for within that time. My mum lives in St Mary. I also wouldn't have been able to take my dog up to see my mum as well, because I doubt whether a carpooling initiative would think very fondly of me shoving my dog in the back of that. And also, my dog, I don't think, is well behaved enough to sit on the bus and be accepted by the bus drivers. So that's a little bit of the reality of what it's like. And one of the reasons why, despite me actually not being a big fan of driving, if I can avoid driving, I'll do it. Me and my husband, we do have a car. Now, some of the examples used are from the minister. He talked about an over-provision of parking and talked about how actually the EV cars are able to use some of the Andium spots. Now, as one of the residents that is currently awaiting residential parking permit, and there is currently, I think, an 18-month wait, I have to wait for that, I would quite gladly use one of those spare spots that Andium may well have. But I also know that Andium do, I think, raise revenue from some of those spare spots, and they do actually utilise that for renting out to people working in the private and commercial sector. So if those spots weren't there, they would be parking elsewhere. It was interesting to hear, I think, from Deputy Scott, and I hope to hear from some of the other representatives of St Brelard as well, because only recently we have seen the concerns of residents at Lekenove with the opening of the Enid Kenno health facility, because they are concerned about losing their parking spaces. And I understand that whilst some of those particular dwellings come with parking, they were built at such a time that cars were very much smaller, and actually some of those spaces are unusable for them. So I do think the need for a parking strategy is a very sensible thing to highlight. And also that parking strategy needs to incorporate how people that are coming into town on a day-to-day basis are going to access town and park. So the potential for park and ride, the potential for, as Deputy Ward suggested, the use of more buses. Because of course, when it comes to the environmental impact of driving, it isn't actually the residents of St Helier that are getting in their cars on a daily basis. We do tend to walk. We tend to use our cars for the things that we need to use them for on just a weekly basis. But for the majority of time, myself and my constituents aren't the people clogging up the roads on a daily basis during rush hour. And I think the more people that live in St Helier and aren't doing that, probably the better. But obviously we need to make sure that we have provision for getting out of town and doing those things that we need to do when we need to do them. So until such a time as we've got carpooling services, perhaps a strategy to discourage people from driving into town that don't have to, and also to cope with the increased number of residents that might be coming in from these new residential developments, then I think the Constable needs our full support. And I encourage all members to vote in favour of this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conataba St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to start with those well-tried lines that I wasn't going to speak either, and I also, if anyone could read that. And I'd just like to start by saying I am pro-bike, I'm pro-walking, and I'm for, and I'm for the carbon neutral strategy. But I do believe and feel that if I am allowed to own a car in St Martin, I can't see how I can sit here and vote and say that people cannot own a car in St Helier. And has it been considered that by having insufficient parking in St Helier is pushing the problems out to other parishes? Gorey Coast Road has several vehicles, white vans, left there by those who live in St Helier. So having insufficient parking in St Helier not only adversely affects St Helier residents, but it adversely affects parishioners in other parishes, and this is a really contentious issue. Such as in St Martin, we have many properties built before the production of the car, and parking spaces at a real premium. We aren't, St Martin has Gorey, the Coast Road. Everybody will see a lot of the houses there. We have several other areas in the parish. It is a beautiful parish, but we haven't all got sort of garages and parking spaces. And it's completely true that we have our own parking officer, and not a day goes by, a week goes by without contentious parking issues, mainly from the fact that we have cars, parked. They're not anti-St Helier or wherever it is, it's just the fact that they can't find a car parking space. So what allowances have been made for the lack of parking in St Helier, which is just moving the problem elsewhere and exacerbates local parking problems. So I actually will be voting and supporting the Constable.
Thank you, Conataba. Deputy Tadier.
Thanks. I'm pleased to follow the last two speakers, and I'll take the invitation of Deputy Feltham to maybe talk a little bit about St Brelard from a different perspective to the Minister for Environment. I think the Constable of St Martin's has hit the nail on the head there. Just because the Environment Minister says that there's been a long and well thought out process that's gone into the differentiation between what you get in town versus what you get in the country doesn't make it discrimination. That doesn't follow at all. It's a complete non sequitur. And the Constable of St Martin, with a clear vision, actually sees through that nonsense argument and says, actually, just because you've put a lot of thought into finding a way to discriminate against somebody and to justify it doesn't mean it's not discrimination. You know, I could find lots of reasons as a business owner not to serve a particular person who the discrimination law says I must serve, and I can try and justify it. It boils down to the same thing. And the second point the Constable of St Martin's made struck me as well, as saying that how can I ask for this policy to be implemented when actually where I live it isn't going to be implemented. And I would ask each member in the Assembly, they don't need to answer aloud, but think about how many car spaces you have at home if you need those spaces. How many cars can you park at your home, be they electric or petrol or diesel vehicles? Is it 1, 2, 3, 10? And if you don't have that many spaces, how many spaces have you got very much nearby you? And if you don't have many, it might be because you live in town. So I think I saw Deputy Ayer shaking his head. So probably even up in the leafy parts of what used to be St Helier 3 and 4, St Helier North now, I'm sure there are parking issues that go there. So we do have inequality and we do have differences depending on where you live. I'm a representative for St Brelard and I have been for the last 15 years, but I've also lived around different parts of the island, including St Helier, including Grouville, including St Clement, and now in St John. And I see the differences that exist in terms of the provision of parking. Essentially, it works out like this. If you live in the countryside, you've probably got parking at your own home, but if you don't, you can just park on the main road for free, and you can block up traffic, and nobody cares, you're not going to get a fine. I'll give you some examples of that. The Minister already knows, because I've written to him about that. If you go up Wellington Road to the top part, which is parallel to Highlands Lane, you can just park on one side of the road there. You could probably park on both sides of the road because there are no yellow lines. And you've got people where there's big residential zone, people have got parking in their drives, but people park on the pavement as well. It may not be the residents, but it could be the residents. It's often white vans, and it could well be people who are working in the area or going to pick up their children from school. And what does it do? It blocks up traffic in that area, and it's complete madness because you should be going up there for a short journey, possibly to pick somebody up from school, and you end up getting stuck in traffic, when there's no need for there to be a traffic jam there, often outside of school hours. But we allow that, and we turn a blind eye to that because it's too difficult to solve. Because if the parishes, or TTS, as they used to be called, say, we're actually going to put a yellow line there, they'd probably be getting some calls. So what do I do with my white van? It's too much of a difficult problem to solve. In St John's at Monmado, where I live, when we initially moved in, we had 2 cars. We quickly reduced to 1. I got myself a petrol scooter. It's really efficient for getting around. It's easy to park. It doesn't consume as much. You know, motorcycles are better than cars, but electric motorcycles are even better than petrol motorcycles, and cycling is better than having a bike. But none of us are here to preach, sir. We all accept the fact that we live in an island which does have a transport issue, and no government yet has resolved that issue. What we seem to be doing here is using a stick when the carrot actually isn't anywhere to be seen. We've got a stick here which we're beating primarily the people of St Helier with, but we're not providing any carrot in the form of sustainable transport. And when I heard the former Environment and Planning Minister, Deputy Luce, saying that actually, well, when we look at town, we're looking for schemes to come forward which have carpooling and electric vehicles. Why only in town? Why are we again discriminating against the kind of planning applications that we will accept in St Helier, and not saying actually all planning applications, wherever they are in the island, we expect to have carpooling. We expect, if there's a block of flats, to have a basement where you can have parking for electric vehicles, if that's what they are. that you can just book. Because I'd say, that although the technology is there, socially we're probably a million miles away from that, because the culture hasn't arrived yet where people are used to doing that. And I say that as somebody who wants to see that and who very much advocates for it. So the reality is that people who live in town, if you ask them, this is why it's discrimination, ask them how much they spend a year on parking fines, because they've actually been caught out several times by parking in the wrong area, maybe only for 5 or 10 minutes, and they've been fined. And it's not, £20 that it used to be. And you can't appeal it in the same way that you might in some of the country parishes in the past. Although anecdotally I've heard it depends on what time in the 4-year cycle you're appealing, but I say that tongue in cheek. I'm sure that's not the case anymore. You get a £60 fine if you live in town, and you get several of those. And these are often people on the lower pay scales who are living in jobs, working in jobs that require them to have cars. And they actually spend a lot of time just driving around town trying to find a parking space, which is either not just free, but just one which is available at all, because they may not have a parking permit for that particular road. So whilst if you live in the countryside, you can just park on the main road outside your house, that's the point I was making in St John's, for the first month or so, I would just park the extra car as best as I could on the main road and realised it's not really acceptable to do that. It's not socially acceptable because you slow the traffic down, although it does need to be slowed down in Monmado, seriously, but that's not the way to do it. So that there is real discrimination in terms of the socio-economic effects that people feel depending where they live. Now, what have we just done in St Brelard, in Le Kennevet? There was a meeting the other night, and I'm grateful that the Minister and some of the other deputies attended that, and the Minister organised it. So we have a situation, and I'm not going to talk about the rights and wrongs of the hospital and the new unit that's been put there, but there was a part of the road where you could park. So, for example, if somebody was needed to come and check on an elderly person, they needed to change their dressing if they were from family nursing and home care, they could pull up on the side of the road, they could nip into one of the houses from, let's say, 97 to 108 Clos de Sable, and they could pop in for half an hour. There's apparently a yellow line's going to be put there, although it's a parish road, it's ultimately for the parish to decide. So because that parking is likely to be removed, we allowed, it wasn't us, but somebody probably at parish level working with DFI said, let's give all of you who currently can't access your houses access to your houses. So basically somebody's paid for a new road to be built, a slip road, so that, yeah, Deputy Renniff, you can go and have a look anytime. I know it's a bit far away from Petitport, but you can go up there and look in Kennevet. This is the real world. It's complicated, where people, some of them are unemployed, they've got difficult, complicated lives, they're not very articulate necessarily. I say that tongue in cheek after yesterday's Paxman outburst. And you can see that there's a new slip road that's been built so that people can park in their drives. And this isn't 10 years ago, this is only this year. So we have a policy in St Helier which is going towards the fact that people are not allowed to have their own parking spaces. But if you live in St Brelard, which is an equally very built-up area, those about 15 homes can have access to their drives. And I don't criticise that scheme. I think that's a good scheme for those people, and it's sensible, and it's something that they wanted, and it's going to allow them to be able to park next to their houses. I had one lady say to me, I'd never really given it much thought, but it's so much more convenient that I can pull my car up now and just unload my shopping rather than having to walk across the estate or the short distance. So, this is about the way it affects people's lives. If you live in town, that's not open to you. My concern here is that we're creating unintentionally a ghetto in St Helier or in parts of St Helier, where we say, if you want to live in St Helier, then the expectation is that you don't have your own car. It could be an electric car. So you could have people who say, look, I want to invest in an electric car. I only want to use the car once a week and twice a year when I take my family on holiday to France, to Portugal, to Romania, to Poland, wherever it is that they want to go, to England. Scotland, why not? Let's include anywhere else. And I'll be doing that later on in the summer. I'll be travelling up to see family in the north of England. And the reason I'll be doing that is because we want to take our dog with us. And we'll do that. And I can do that because we've got a car parking space at home and we can use the car as frequently or as infrequently as we want. But if I were to be living in the centre of St Helier, and if I'd made the choice with my wife to buy somewhere in the centre of St Helier, possibly a new build, we may not have any parking for that. And I'm told, well, don't worry, because you should have a carpool in the centre of St Helier, because that's what's going to happen. And so do we say to the person who works as a TA or as a nurse in St Helier or in whatever job who wants to use their car maybe every weekend and to go back home in the summer to visit their family, that they can't do that, they can't own a car, even if actually they're trying to do everything else right. And the irony is, if you don't use your car very much, you need a car parking space so much more because the car needs to be parked for long periods of time. So it makes sense to have your own car parking space, doesn't it? I mean, am I talking nonsense? I'm getting some blank looks here. Is it? I think these things are all true. These are just truisms. And so, I think when I hear a good speech from Deputy Scott saying that she's sympathetic to the Constable of St Helier, I hope that sympathy translates into a vote. And I also hope that this isn't some kind of whipped, ministerially whipped vote, because I think it's much more nuanced than that. We don't yet have the supplementary planning guidance for parking. And I think this debate is effectively saying to the Minister, we need you to take a pause and to really make sure that you've got joined up thinking in the way that this is going to work. Get all the, where is the proper transport policy that we're still waiting for? Lastly, I'll leave members with this point. We're all here, I think, not just to represent our constituents where we're elected, but I think to try and act in the public interest. And we must remember the fact that, OK, St Helier has a third of the population, but when you combine St Helier with St Clements and St Saviour, you're looking at well over half of the island's population live in those areas. And they're already doing the right thing by and large. These are the people who do probably walk to work, probably cycle to work, because they can if they live in town. And the constituent, one constituent who came to our meeting in St Brelard, a non-town resident, I'll perhaps finish with her, she says, look, I've got a car, I need to make sure I've got somewhere to park. That's why she came to the meeting with us, Minister. And she said, I don't use my car very much because she lives and works in Le Kennevet, so she can just walk, a 5-minute walk across. But she needs her car so that when her family want to go to Plemont, remember Plemont, we spent lots of money creating that headland. And I think when Sadie, I call her Sadie, sorry sir, the former constable of St Saviour was here, she also supported the purchasing of Plemont, but she was mindful of the fact that people needed to get out in the island wherever they lived. So we can't simply say we've got a beautiful island, we want you to access it, and actually say, but on the one hand we're taking your cars away from you, but the other 11 parishes, or perhaps 9 parishes, because it will extend into St Clements and St Saviour, and probably into Mothon very quickly. This is the issue we're talking about, and I think I'm happy not just to sympathise with the Constable of St Helier, but also to give him my vote in this, as a St Brelard representative.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. And some members may remember that I used to write a regular column for the JP about 2 years ago. And I was just calling it back up because the column that I wrote 2 years ago resonates really well with what we're talking about. So if members will indulge me, I'll read it. It's only 500 words. And the headline is "Subscribe to a Future of Rental Cars." Now, I can't do an American accent, sir, but the first line is, there ain't nothing finer than being behind the wheel of your own car. And that's the line from Christine, the John Carpenter film, where a teenager becomes infatuated with a car and ends the film with a dynamic vehicle causing havoc and causing members of the local community to lose their lives as it becomes able to drive itself without human intervention. In the future, of course, self-driving cars will be part and parcel of everyday life, hopefully with more benevolent outcomes than in a supernatural horror film. Indeed, even now, there are plenty of places around the world where autonomous vehicles are being tried and tested, and it is generally accepted that this technology could become mainstream in under a decade. The main prerequisite to allow autonomous vehicles to run safely is a resilient 5G infrastructure, as internet connectivity would need to be maintained at all times, obviously. While the slowdown from fossil-fuelled engines to electric vehicles partially cures one environmental problem, it only replaces one problem with another. It is therefore the issue of vehicle ownership which needs to be addressed in order for us to have a sustainable future when it comes to personal transportation. In my view, people will give up their cars when there is a cheaper, safer, more convenient alternative. So how would autonomous vehicles become mainstream? Perhaps as a starting point, blocks of flats that are built could be built no longer with parking spaces, but instead each resident would have a subscription to an EV or a similar type of arrangement, where cars could be booked out at a monthly charge and access to the vehicles would be booked via a calendar system in a similar way to the way that people currently book rooms for meetings via a shared app. Technology, of course, is the answer to the problem of personal transportation. And if you consider the way that we hired films on video in the 1980s, which although a revelation at the time, was cumbersome, time-consuming and ineffective compared to the way that we watch films today via Netflix or similar apps. You can get to understand that ownership of vehicles will move from its current position once a better solution is available. Perhaps the majority will no longer have the joy of ownership of their own vehicle, but we will have safe and sustainable transport that is both cheap and available to all, the planet being the ultimate beneficiary of this change. Petrol and diesel engine vehicles will then become a curio for high days, holidays and weddings in the same way that horse and cart carriages are today. We need to build for the future, sir, not for the past.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tom Binney, your light came on briefly. Do you want to speak?
Yes, please, sir. I think I'd like to start by reassuring Deputy Tadger that I've not been whipped by anybody. I think he probably knows me well enough to know that I speak for myself. And I think it's probably best that I declare that I have ample parking where I live, but that doesn't mean that I don't I'm not fully conversant with the problems of people that aren't so fortunate as I am. So anyway, members have heard a lot of good arguments on both sides, particularly the ones made by the Constable and the Minister for the Environment, and I'm certainly sure they don't need any further comment from me. For reasons which I think are fairly obvious, I'm definitely going to support the Minister for the Environment for all the reasons that he's carefully articulated. That said, as is becoming obvious, I do have some sympathy for a number of the points that have been made here, and I believe that quite a lot of those can be addressed through having a decent parking strategy. And with that in mind, I know that policies and strategies take a long time to reach fruition. So what I am going to propose here is that in the next couple of weeks, I'd like to convene a meeting with the Constable, with the Minister for the Environment and the town deputies, so that we can consider some measures that might be taken in the first instance to change things. And I've got a few ideas. I don't think it's wise for me to articulate them with members at the moment, but I certainly want to put those ideas to the people concerned so that we can try and make some progress. I think I'd also like to publicly invite Deputy Ward to meet me to discuss public transport. We're constantly criticised and told that we don't care about public transport. That's simply not true. So I'd be very keen to hear the Deputy's ideas on that and see if we can make some progress in that regard. And I think Deputy Tadger may also recall that I made a commitment to the residents of St Brelade's to take a look at parking in St Brelade's. I'm afraid I don't think that supporting Constable Crowcroft's proposition this afternoon is the right way forward. I shall be voting against it for obvious reasons, and I urge members to do the same because I don't think that's helpful at this point in time. I'm genuinely hopeful that a parking strategy will address a number of those problems. So, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miller, you would like to come on briefly. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Like others, I didn't want to talk on this, honestly. But I've just heard so many challenges about people's right to live and what they're being denied. And I want to think about what we're actually talking about. We're talking about the redevelopment of sites, it feels like, in St Helier, in central St Helier, and their availability to provide parking. For interest, I will declare I own and live in the central St Helier area. My property has no parking, and in no way could I ever redevelop it to such a way that it could provide parking. And that's what matters here, is most sites within central St Helier, which are ready for redevelopment, the policy would allow, for example, office space to be converted into parking. Not parking, into residential. They can't provide parking. They are in sites in pedestrianised areas or above shops. We're talking about a policy, hopefully, to get lockstep with actually what the form of development St Helier will take. So think about the streets in that. That's going to be Columbury, Lamott Street, Hill Street, King Street, Bedford Street, Hughes Street, so on. These are the sites we're talking about. Now, I mentioned one in there which could provide car parking with residential development, maybe two, but those would be larger sites that would be developed. So if we have anything to worry about, I just double-checked, and if anyone has said this and I missed it, it went in one ear, one out, I do apologise. I will quote the draft policy that the Minister has published. It says, the provision of car-free development proposals in St Helier Town Centre, the most restricted area or most sustainable area, I think is the word, however, will require justification. So the policy is not saying don't do it, it's saying to remove car parking will require justification. And then it says, and will be assessed against the merits of each application. Car-free development will normally only be supported where it is well located with good access to services and alternative transport options. The development will provide 10 or fewer homes, and the predominant type of accommodation is less likely to accommodate families. I look to the Minister to shake his head. I've snipped from the policy here. Anyone looking for this, they will find it in the document published in, I believe, March 2023. It's in there. I really struggle to see what we're debating. There's a policy that would enable car parking in St Helier on the most sustainable sites that have parking, yet not those that can't provide it. And I really ask members to be quick, and let's move on to some better debates.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member to speak?
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to labour on Simbrilares because this is not the proposition, but I would just like to emphasise the point and understand that consideration is being given to tradesmen and the parking of white vans in the public domain, given that as an issue, and I couldn't see it addressed in the policy which I've just been going through. Times have changed, has been alluded to by others, and we now find that in terms of developments, all the tradesmen engaged on that particular development will be turning up in their own vans. Those vans will need to park not only for the purposes of that development, but also when they go home at night. And this is very often an issue which seems to be prevalent, certainly not only in St Giles, but I feel in St Helier too. This is something that I think the Minister needs to consider. Cars are like water, sir. They will find the path of least resistance, and they will turn up, if they're stopped from parking somewhere, they'll turn up somewhere else to the first free available spot, and next to the least expensive after that. And that is where the parking strategy does need to come into place. I am always worried, sir, when we restrict parking in certain areas that previous point I made will result in vehicle spillage, is a term I use, whereby vehicles will just park wherever they can outside someone else's house, and that causes untold social problems, because it's part of my life and other constables, the regular complaints we get about people will be parking in the public domain, but in a place where it upsets other residents. And I think we must try and avoid that for the object being to keep the community happy. We also need, in terms of looking after our population, and the demographic is for all to see. We need to be aware that not everybody is going to be walking, not everybody is going to be cycling. Those who can will take a bus, and people will have free bus passes after a certain age. But if there is a need to transport themselves, older people will be using a car. The other point, just picking up on the policy, again, the draft policy is in terms of the infrastructure. I know JEC are rolling the infrastructure out the best they can, but there are a lot of parts of the island where, as referred to in the document, the passive the infrastructure is just not yet. And I wonder actually how extensive it is in town to enable those with electric vehicles to get them charged up. And just finally, so with regard to the car clubs, is this not a utopian view? We do see issues about car sharing with, well, should we say, single women. We see it with children. And I think it's something with which we have to take great care as time goes on, but we don't want to fall into the trap of creating a problem which we haven't yet got. So I don't see anything wrong with the proposal of the Constable to defer the consultations at such time as the parking strategy has been developed and consulted upon, because I think it really is integral with the whole proposals the Minister is making, and if he is to get on with it, I don't think it should be much delay. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I think that was a really, really good speech from the Constable of St Brelad. He made some very logical points there, and they resonated with me as somebody who lives in the centre of St Helier and what I see on a daily basis. Cars will turn up where they have to turn up if there's no other options for them. And living near the Millennium Town Park, I've noticed the situation with access to car parks around that space get worse and worse in recent years. About 5 years ago, when I first got a car, you could very easily find a space in Minden Place, Nelson Street, Midvale Road. What is now the Ann Court development had a temporary car park there as well. It was pretty easy to find a space in the evenings or on weekends if you were a resident in that place and you needed to. It is now extremely difficult to do so. Minden Place is full very regularly, including if you're potentially coming from outside of town and you want to go to a restaurant nearby and would look at Minden Place on the weekend. Very difficult. That can't be good for the Arts Centre when there's a show going on there. Midvale Road, obviously now being one way, can make it trickier to get a space there too. Some spaces in Nelson Street have been lost because of the development works that have been going on there. Yet at the same time, more and more developments are taking place in that part of town. And so I think that the supplementary planning guidance from the Minister is putting the cart before the horse, because we have problems now that with the implementation of that particular guidance will be made worse in the short term, and there isn't any evidence or clear proposals to match up with what's in the supplementary planning guidance to start trying to make things better at the same time. There's been talk about the car share clubs. So I'm a proponent of the car share clubs. I think that ought to be a really good part of the solution and a way of reducing the desire of people who live in the centre of town to have their own parking spaces. But I think some people seriously misunderstand or don't have any concept of what it's like to actually use them. They're not cheap. They might be fine if you think you need one for your weekly shop that you might be able to get done in an hour or hour and a half or something if you're quick. They're useless if you're taking your family out to Plemont to explore the countryside up there or go to the beach, or if you've got equipment that you need to transport somewhere, because if that's a job that's going to take hours to do, it's going to cost you a fortune to use that car. Buses won't be an alternative in many of those instances, and if it's something that you're just doing from one side of town to the other, As Deputy Ward quite rightly said, the cost of the bus there is totally disproportionate for that kind of journey. So the guidance is putting the cart before the horse, and I think the comments made from the Environment Minister struck me as just out of touch with what it's really like to live in St Helier. But in St Helier, we're perfectly well used to being told what's good for us by people who don't live in the parish and won't ultimately be affected by those decisions and how they're made. But we can see on the ground what's really happening, the extra congestion, the packed car parks that there already are, and how that has been getting worse in recent years with no sign of anything tangible being done to address it. And that's why I feel I can support the Constable, at least at this point, although perhaps it may be some small kind of consolation that if the proposition isn't adopted, to defer the supplementary planning guidance. When I think of the supplementary planning guidance on the affordable housing contribution on private sites, which has been delayed for over 7 months, well, maybe I haven't got that much to worry about.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this proposition? Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I was listening intently to the debates of this morning and heard very loud and clear messages from members who wish to have serious decisions come to this Assembly. They wish to be involved in government decisions and decision-making for all islanders. But so I think this debate is a good example of us going around in circles. The key word in the Constable's proposition is to defer. Now, we're endlessly receiving feedback from members of the public who are, and members of the business community too, who are exceedingly frustrated. What do they tell us? They tell us they want to see building. They tell us that planning is often bringing the island to a halt. They tell us that they want to see us deliver housing. But, sir, it's in this very place that we often find those deferral arguments come to bear, and they are the very things that grind progress to a halt. The very people who today are wanting to support the Constable's proposal to defer are the same people who didn't support rezoning of sites in the Bridging Island plan and now say that town's full and we can't develop housing in town because there's no more room. That's another example of deferral. So we have to actually look to delivering on visions, and I think Deputy Ferry outlined a vision for meeting the needs of our modern world, using technology to our best advantage, and also meeting the requirements that we have all in a previous Assembly agreed to commit to, which is climate change and reducing emissions. That is something that I know the Environment Minister is absolutely passionate about, and actually what his planning guidelines are doing, as Deputy Curtis pointed out, is actually finding a way forward, helping people who want to develop, create homes for that are so much needed in our community, for people to enjoy a better quality of life, for businesses to find the staff that they much need so that they can continue to enjoy economic activity and deliver services and entertainment for islanders. So we have to find a way forward, and I really would urge members to remember that actually we have committed to improving parking in and around town. We did that in the government plan last year, and the Constable himself does know, as a member of Future Places, how we are committed to improving the environment of town, to removing cars that are parked on the streets and replacing them with trees and wider access for cyclists, for pedestrians, but of course remembering that those who dwell in town will need places to park and ease of access around the place, but we can do so in a better way, sir, and not through deferring today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Does any other wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon the Conopar to reply.
Thank you, sir. The Chief Minister who spoke last said that the key message of my proposition is to defer. I would say the key message of my proposition is not to defer, it's to be fair. And of course, I share her vision for St Helier. We haven't seen anything on the ground yet, but after a year, but I share the vision. But let me say, and I say it in my report, that to remove on-street parking to create cycle routes is going to further increase the pressure on those residents of St Helier and other parishes who do need parking, and who find that the residents' parking zones have suddenly shrunk, and Deputy Feltham's place on the waiting list for a residence parking permit has suddenly gone from 18 months to 4 years. So that vision has to be part of a joined-up policy. Now, sir, I did suggest at the beginning that this wasn't an opportunity for a transport debate. Sadly, not all members took my steer. I said that this was about being fair to the residents, in particular of St Helier, though interestingly my report, and I've checked it, doesn't say only St Helier residents are being discriminated against, because I picked up from the residents from the SPG that there are other parts of the island as well which will be caught by the sustainable transport zoning, and those residents them too. In St Brelade's, for example, the other built-up areas will also find their access to a parking space in a new development has been reduced. So I just wanted to make that correction. And I'm not going to fall into the trap that other members have done in reopening a transport debate, because we do have a lot of transport debates, and I don't think we need to go there today. But I do want to pick up on a couple of points that were made. First of all, I want to thank everyone who spoke, particularly, of course, those who supported the proposition. And among those, I thought Deputy Feltham in particular, you can tell the people who live in town, because she really knows how difficult it is to bring up a family in town without access to parking. She knows it. And also Deputy Howell, not, I think, a townie, but she knows how important it is to be able to get a tradesperson to carry out work. And it is a fact that there are some people who will not go to certain addresses in St Helier because they'll say, we'll get a parking ticket. So there is a real problem about the availability of parking for tradespeople, parking for visitors, particularly in the residence parking zones, which are a kind of Frankenstein's monster for me. Having given Frankenstein life, he's become a bit of a nightmare, actually. But the parish is reviewing residence parking because we know how important it is. We just want it to work better. But it does penalise people who want visitors. They don't have a residence parking permit, yet they can't have any visitors. And that's really sad. I want to thank Deputy Luce, who corrected me. I said it was a decade we've been waiting. He said, actually, put an S on decade. It's decades we've been waiting. And I think it's been quite interesting listening to some of the speakers who are fresh into the States. You can tell the people who've only been in this assembly for a year, because they're full of, it's all going to change. When you've been in this assembly, sir, for 25 years or more, you've heard that before. You've heard it before. And that's why a certain amount of cynicism creeps in. I won't say pessimism, because I remain an optimist. But it is absolutely the case that if we had a parking strategy, we would not be having this debate. The SPGs would have been refined on the say-so of this Parliament a long time ago. But what's happening is a minister is doing the job that Parliament has not been able to do, because successive ministers for infrastructure have not brought forward the parking strategy, or indeed the cycling strategy, or indeed the bus strategy, or indeed the walking strategy. So I'm going to turn now to the Environment Minister, who is one of those members who's only been in for a year. And I would have expected perhaps a little bit of humility in his approach. We didn't get that. We had a very interesting assertion that because the residential space standards guidance has been changed in a good way to get more space in people's properties, we have to let developers off the hook. I mean, not ask them to provide so much parking. I don't follow that. If I'm buying a flat, I want to have generous space in my flat, but I also want access to parking if I'm one of those people whose complicated lives requires me to own a car. So I didn't understand that there's any kind of trade-off required in that respect. But I think the strangest assertion from the Minister was that, and he actually says that I want to keep in place the old 1988 advice. But as I said in my opening speech, that isn't being followed. The Planning Department is already pursuing cycle parking, electric charging points. They're already allowing numerous developments through, and I refer to a couple in my report, without adequate parking in the town centre. So to say that I'm trying to take us back to 1988 is simply absurd, to use his word. It is absurd. The Roads Committee in St Helier, for example, I refer to them in my report, open meetings to the public for the last, 16 years. They look at every single application for residential development in St Helier. So I personally have looked at every single application for residential development in St Helier in the last 21 years. So I think that my view about what is required in the town should carry some weight. And to say that I'm just trying to hold up development, I think it's unfair, and I think it's unfair on St Helier because we are taking the major part of the island's residential development. If you drive around the ring road now, what you will see is endless housing flats going up out of the ground. So nobody is holding up, no St Helier representatives, whether elected deputies, constable or roads committee, are holding up development of housing. We are taking well more than our share. And I'm grateful to members who understand that and who have reflected that in their speeches. I'm grateful to the Council of St Martin, who is not about to say that St Helier residents should have more difficulty in parking than people in St Martin. She mentions that we're starting to park in her parish, which seems to me quite a long walk, but if that's happening, then I wouldn't be surprised. I'm grateful to Deputy Tadier because he reminded me of a speech I made when I supported the purchase of Plymouth. And I remember at the time saying that because St Helier residents and representatives support the purchase of green fields and the restoration of our national park, there is a quid pro quo there, and it is that St Helier residents need to be able to visit those spaces. So let us have the same parking standards that you enjoy in the other parishes. I don't share the Chief Minister's view that Deputy Ferry's vision was a utopian. I think it was more dystopian. It sort of reminded me of Blade Runner. I personally think there's a lot of... I'm an unlikely apologist for the motor car, but I think there's a lot of very strange talk about how we're all going to be just looking at the occasional car passing or see one in a museum. Let's face it, most of us have cars. A lot of people are moving to electric cars. A lot of us, if we're honest, actually really like our cars because they give us a sense of freedom. We can go where we want, when we want, with whom we want. If we get the boot sandy, we're not worried about having to pay a fine to the hire car company or the car club. I think some members need to get a bit more realistic. Cars are not going to disappear from this island. What we do need to do is to reduce the number of cars. And a visitor I'm looking after at the moment said to me yesterday, why don't you do what Singapore is doing and just say 1 car per household? Well, why don't we? I say that to Council of Ministers. Why don't you address this across the board, wherever you live? St Mary, town centre of St Helier, you can only have 1 car. Let's do it in a fair way. And so my argument remains the same. I don't believe the Minister, the Environment Minister, has challenged at all the unfairness that is at the heart of the SPGs. It is unfair to single out people who live in the town centre and say to developers, actually, you don't need to build any car parking spaces when you do that development. And if I might finish with one of the rare successes the St Helier Roads Committee had, when the developer, I think it was Dandara, came to us and said, we're going to knock down the bank in West Centre and we're going to build apartments. We said, look, this is a complete new build, so you could put some parking in for that proportion of residents who want to enjoy car ownership. The developer went away and came back and said, yeah, we can provide 12 parking spaces. And if you go to West Centre, that development, very good development, has about a dozen parking spaces for residents. So it can be done. And it's entirely wrong to say that there are parts of town where you can't do that. So I do maintain the proposition. It is about fairness. I hope I haven't strayed into parking strategy or transport strategy. We have that debate to look forward to when the Minister brings forward that and his other strategies, hopefully in the coming year. Thank you, sir. I maintain the proposition. I ask for the appel.
Thank you, Conor Tarr. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been rejected, 19 votes pour, 24 votes contre, and 1 abstention.
Can we have the 19, please? The one.
Yes.
Those voting for the Connotabs of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, St Martin, St Clement, Deputies Southern, Tadier, The Hegara, Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mezek, Coles, Porray, Catherine Curtis, Faltham, Howell, Kovac and Andrews, and Deputy Scott abstained.
The next item is support for parents of babies needing additional neonatal care, P52, lodged by Deputy Kovac. The main respondent is the Minister for Social Security. There is an amendment lodged by the Minister. Deputy Kovac, do you accept this amendment?
Yes, and I'll read it as amended, please.
Thank you very much. Are members content for the proposition to be read as amended? Thank you very much. Yes, Greffier, please read the proposition as amended.
The states are asked to decide whether they're of opinion that provision, including financial support, should be established to support parents who have preterm babies or babies requiring neonatal care, and to request the Minister for Social Security to bring forward the proposals for this provision for approval by the Assembly prior to the end of December 2024.
Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I want to start by thanking the Social Security Minister for putting an amendment in support of this proposition. As the text in the report of my proposition eloquently states, no matter the length of stay, a neonatal experience can have a long-lasting impact on the whole family. Having a baby is a joyous and life-changing event, but it can also be stressful and challenging, especially when the baby is born prematurely or needs extra medical attention. Parents of such babies face not only emotional and physical strain, but also financial hardship, as they have to balance their work and family obligations, often with reduced income and increased expenses. The current parental law does not adequately address the needs of these parents, who may have to return to work sooner than they are ready to do so, or forego their income to stay with their baby. This can have negative consequences for both the parents and the baby, as they may miss out on crucial bonding time, breastfeeding opportunities, and important developmental support. Research has shown that parental presence and involvement can improve the health and well-being of preterm and sick babies, as well as reduce parental stress and anxiety. That is why we need to establish a provision that would offer financial support to these parents, in addition to their existing leave entitlements. Such a provision would allow them to spend more time with their baby without worrying about their bills or losing their jobs. It would also recognize the unique challenges and circumstances that these parents face and show them that they are not alone in their journey. The proposition does not prescribe how such a provision should be designed or implemented, but rather leaves it to the Minister for Social Security and his policy team to find the best way to achieve the intent. However, it does suggest some possible features, such as a grant payment based on the degree of prematurity or hospitalization of the baby, up to a maximum of 12 weeks. It also asks the Minister to bring the proposal back to the Assembly for approval, ensuring that we have a say in the final scheme. The number of potential people impacted are very low, but to them, this will be a massive support, making a massive difference. This is not a radical or costly proposition. It is a compassionate and sensible one. It is based on evidence and best practice from other jurisdictions that have introduced similar measures, such as Scotland and New Zealand. It is also aligned with our values and vision as an assembly that cares for its people and supports its families. I urge you all to vote in favor of this proposition and give preterm babies and their parents the support they deserve. I now make the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I support Deputy Kovac's proposition. Sorry, I have a little issue with this microphone. I support Deputy Kovac's proposition, sir, and I thank the Deputy for accepting my amendment, which will give me sufficient time to find an effective solution which will work for Jersey. I acknowledge the challenges faced by parents when a baby is born prematurely or requires hospital treatment within the first 4 weeks of life. This will be an incredibly difficult time for parents, and I understand the Deputy's aims in looking to provide additional support. It's important to note that while the Deputy's report refers to the UK Neonatal Care, Leave and Pay Act, this is primary legislation which has only very recently been approved. The UK system will not be operational till 2025, so we do not yet have a full understanding of how it will work in practice. I should of course say, sir, that as some members will know, I do not support any slavish following of UK legislation, especially if in that context the term UK actually means England. As Deputy Kovac has suggested, there are other jurisdictions which may form more useful comparators. However, while it's essential that we consider the matter in a Jersey context to ensure we establish support that works for our island, it would be prudent to monitor how the UK/English plans develop over the next year or more. Subject to the approval of the Assembly today, I will include this project in my 2024 delivery plan. I'm mindful that policy resources will be required to undertake this project, and members should be aware that this may impact the scope and timing of other agreed work streams. Work will include examination of both employment rights and benefit entitlement. I will also be instructing the Employment Forum to undertake a consultation on the appropriate level of employment rights to include, for example, time off work. The Deputy's report identifies a possible financial cost to providing benefits at a total of possibly over £300,000 a year. As I note in my amendment report, as no funding stream has been identified, implementation of the scheme to the extent of any benefit payments will be dependent upon securing sufficient funding on an ongoing basis. Concluding this project by the end of 2024 will allow for a bid for funding in the 2025 government plan if necessary. I encourage all members to support this proposition as amended. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. In the UK, there are charities like Bliss UK who campaign tirelessly on these issues. One of their campaigns has helped to bring in the Neonatal Care Act, as already mentioned, which allows for a statutory entitlement for paid leave from work for employed parents of babies who need neonatal care. Of course, there may be a better way to do this in Jersey. Jersey does not have any measures like this, though, specifically for families of premature babies and those needing neonatal care. There is nothing much worse than having a sick child, and I'm sure the Assembly does not want parents to be struggling with money concerns while recovering from possibly a traumatic birth and while trying to focus on their baby's recovery. Considering Jersey's very high cost of living, this proposition could make a huge difference to a small number of families at a very difficult time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the proposition? I call upon Deputy Kovac to reply. Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for the members that spoken. I'm glad to see support of such an important proposition. Before I literally just going to close, I want to remind Deputy Binay and to have also the commitment of Health Minister, if possible, because it's linked to it. We understand when a premature or sick baby needs to have their parents close by, that is when they are in hospital as well. And we know that the SCBU doesn't have such provision at the moment. And if in the new hospital facilities will be the possibility to have that provision that would address further these needs. In conclusion, having a preterm baby is not a choice. In order to give preterm children the best start in their lives, we can take a small step to easing some of these of the difficulties encountered by their parents as additional financial pressure arising. And I call for the appeal.
That has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity for casting their votes. I invite the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce the proposition has been adopted unanimously, 43 votes in favour.
Thank you to everyone for your support.
The next item is negotiation of purchase for the site of the Seaside Cafe at Greve de Lec, P53, lodged by Deputy Farnham. The main respondents are the Ministers for Treasury and Resources and Infrastructure. There's an amendment lodged by Deputy Stevenson. Do you accept the amendment, Deputy Farnham?
Yes, sir.
And do you wish your proposition to be read as amended?
Yes, please, sir.
Members content for that to occur. Thank you, greffier. Please read the proposition as amended.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Minister for Treasury and Resources, in consultation with the Minister for Infrastructure, A, to negotiate on behalf of the States of Jersey the purchase of the former Seaside Cafe and car park site at Greve de Lec for a use that will be of environmental, cultural and social benefit to the public, including the option of working with partner organisations in completing the purchase and securing the future use of the site. B, to ensure that the negotiated price represents value for money and that prior to the transaction being presented to the States in accordance with Standing Order 168, the price has been subject to independent assessment. And C, to consider options, consulting as necessary, for enabling the Government of Jersey to be notified when properties or areas of significant value to the people of Jersey become available, so that early consideration can be given to potentially acquiring them on behalf of the public.
Deputy Farnham.
Thank you. So Greve de Lec is one of Jersey's most popular and iconic bays with a long and remarkable history, which remains an important and valued part of island life. The Bailiwick of Jersey, by George Bellane, describes Greve de Lec as a small bay on the north coast, partly in St. Wan's Parish and partly in St. Mary's Parish, the mill stream of the Mulla de Lec dividing the parishes. Greve, sir, is a French word for a sandy shore. The former Café Romani site in Greve de Lec was sold by the Lewis family in 2020 in a private land transaction. In January 2022, the new owners obtained planning permission to redevelop the site, which would see the existing buildings demolished and replaced with a single large dwelling, a restaurant and a car park significantly reduced in size. The site is currently disused and is lying empty and almost derelict, completely shut off to the public, restricting access to parking, causing recurring problems for the users and the businesses of the bay. In fact, sir, the current state of affairs has had a real detrimental impact, to the point that the whole character of the bay, sir, has changed. The site is currently listed for sale, so the state still have an opportunity to acquire this important piece of land for the benefit of the public, sir. An acquisition on behalf of the public, sir, could preserve the coastline and protect the bay from inappropriate development and other activities not appropriate for the area. It would ensure public access for recreational and educational purposes, sir. And I say educational because Greve de Lec is immensely popular for school visits, sir, given the very unique history, environment and economy, sir, all uniquely blended together in that area. It would provide a great opportunity to improve upon the existing facilities, infrastructure and landscaping, sir. And I know Deputy Stevenson's amendment addresses this. It would boost tourism and bring significant social and economic benefits to the area, sir, and it would preserve the unique character and historic and cultural value, sir. And what value can we place on that? I want to make it clear, sir, that this proposition is not a carte blanche for the government to negotiate at any cost. I think there has to be a good, sensible negotiation, sir, and the government will have to come back and get that approved by the Assembly. But this acquisition, sir, would also, I believe, at the right price, be a very prudent investment for the public. Not only would it be an environmental asset, sir, but also a valuable fiscal asset with the potential to provide an income stream and other economic benefits to the local area. Prior to lodging the propositions, I did speak to officials to ensure there had been no a negotiation started, sir, and of course that was concerned. And the senior official did tell me, sir, that it had been discussed at officer level, but there had been no official negotiations taking place. So I hope that might have changed since this proposition was lodged, and that if that is the case, so that's good, and it would give us a head start. So, but I think we do have a unique opportunity here. So, and this proposition seeks to facilitate a negotiation that will lead to the purchase by the states of the cafe and the car park, together with the associated land, for the use that will be of benefit to the public, and of course subject to successful negotiations. It will come back to this Assembly for approval, sir. Mindful of the time, sir, I'll keep my opening speech relatively short, sir, and to that end I make the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member speak on the proposition? Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful to the Deputy for accepting my amendment to this proposition. I'm going to start in a very similar way to Deputy Farnham. There's no doubt that Greve de Lec is a very special place. It's one of Jersey's much-loved North Coast bays, a picture postcard perfect setting loved by many islanders and visitors alike. But Greve de Lec is more than just a pretty sandy bay. Like much of our coastline, it is a place steeped in history, from its Martello Tower and early 19th century defensives that were built in direct response to a potential invasion by Napoleon, to its World War II links, its time even as a nighttime hotspot in the 1970s and 80s, and much more. It's been a place of community focus for centuries, whether that be fishermen and boat owners, the fairs of Victorian times, today's dog walkers, those enjoying water sports, or local residents who, like me, took their exercise during the pandemic in the bay. And I still think that taking your exercise sounds like a Victorian term in itself still. Over the past year, I've been told many stories about just how rich and diverse this area is and how important it is to islanders. And that's islanders from across Jersey, not just those living nearby. And there's much hope out there that it can be important for future generations of islanders too. When we talk about places like Fort Regent being out of the way and question if people will manage to get up the hill for this, that or the other, or moan about St. Juan being so far away, let's not forget that people travelled from all over for a night out at the pubs and clubs of Greve de Lec. I'm told there may even have been a bowling alley there at one stage. And as I discovered yesterday, there's a water source at Greve, which people from all over the island used to visit, as it was once believed that the water it produced had healing powers for the eyes. It may also interest members to know that during the pandemic, Greve de Lec, and specifically the site that we're discussing today, became something of a community hub. Once restrictions allowed people to meet together outside, a book club would meet regularly on the terrace of the former seaside cafe, even when the cafe remained closed. The local residents I've spoken to about this tell me it was a very special social experience for those otherwise cut off from other people. And I share this now because as we consider the potential public acquisition of this site, its potential as more than just a pretty sandy bay, or more specifically a beach cafe and car park at a pretty sandy bay, is important. So too is a reminder that this is a public bay, and one that we should be protecting for future generations of islanders. Since my election to this assembly, I've been working towards building a potential vision for this site. Given its place at the heart of Greve de Lec and occupying a large area of its seafront, its future is inextricably linked to that of the bay itself. Yes, it may have long been in private ownership, but it was accessible to the public. The closure of the cafe and car park has, as Deputy Farnham has already said, already had an impact, not just on parking and access routes down to the beach, but also on the general atmosphere in the bay. And I have no doubt that if a private home were to be built on the former seaside cafe site, it will feel as though part of that bay is private too. We already see it at places like Portlet, where visitors to that bay stay away from certain parts of the beach because they feel like they belong to someone else. In seeking to build a vision, I wanted to strengthen the case for its public purchase and ensure not only value for money for the island, but that the island could get social, cultural and environmental value for its purchase too. And as I say, I'm grateful to Deputy Farnham for accepting my amendment, part of which speaks to these very points. I also wanted to ensure there remains the potential option for the government to work with third parties should it be considered the best way forward. And I've engaged with a number of potential third parties in the course of this work in recent months. And there are a number who are very interested in working with government on achieving something of significant value to the island on this site. These conversations are just that, conversations. They're not binding, no vision set in stone and no potential partners or ideas decided. But to give members a flavour of the potential of this site and how government could partner with others, let me share a few of those ideas with you. The Baudet Foundation, which runs Les Ormes and each year provides all kinds of opportunities and support to children and young people, particularly from lower income backgrounds, says it would be interested in a long-term lease of the site to provide a base for enabling young people from across Jersey to access the beach and the sea. There could be community rooms for general hire, changing rooms, a cafe to feed the visiting children and wider public, space even for a beach wheelchair, and of course, parking. All of this could get underway reasonably quickly with actually very little capital investment initially. And given the previous debate about parking, it is worth noting that part of Baudet's model often involves it transporting children to its sites, not just allowing them access, and they often feed them too. The National Trust also supports the public acquisition. Another suggestion, actually drawn out by one local resident, proposes an interpretation centre and cafe, a rewilded picnic area, more bike parking and rentals, electric car charging, and space for pool cars potentially, and more. There is so much potential with this site, and potential which could have social, cultural and environmental value for our island. As I say, this is about more than just a cafe and car park next to a pretty sandy bay, or it could be at least. So, although today is not necessarily the ideal time to be debating this proposition, I would have preferred to have waited to ensure that the sometimes delicate negotiations which often feature around such transactions could play out on their own time and in their own terms. I think, as I've made it very clear, I absolutely support the principle of the public purchase of this site. I've received significant public encouragement on this matter also. But I'm also keen that we learn a lesson from this experience and take steps to protect against something potentially happening like this again. It's widely accepted that the government did not know that the former cafe was up for sale, in which case, how could it be reasonably expected to know to try to buy it, should it have wanted to? And Part C of my amendment, which has now been accepted by Deputy Farnham, asks that work is undertaken to investigate what mechanisms could be put in place to ensure the government is notified when a site of strategic public interest is for sale. I phrased that part of the amendment broadly on purpose to allow the concept to be thoroughly investigated and options to be considered. Consultation is also likely to be needed. Could we, for example, build into the sale and purchase process a formal notification for land and property in, say, the Coastal National Park? Should all sites always be offered to the government for purchase in the first instance? Do we need to improve our own internal procedures and policies to ensure there are those actively monitoring potential sites which could come up for sale? The case of the Seaside Cafe and others over the years have shown me that we need to be having these conversations so that we can then take steps to protect our island for the people who live here today and our future generations. If a mechanism can be developed and agreed in due course, it's also likely that government would need to create a fund from which strategic purchases could be made, potentially at short notice. It is, after all, no good knowing about a site for sale but not having the financial pot or the funds to then be able to do anything about it. That, however, is a conversation for another day. What I hope members will join me in doing today is recognising that we have an opportunity before us and one that is too good to miss. If this proposition is approved, there's still much to be done to realise the ambition of actually purchasing this site. We need independent valuations, and I really would stress, as Deputy Farnham did, there is absolutely no blank cheque here. We've got to achieve value for the people of Jersey. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I have no problem whatsoever in supporting this proposition, sir, as amended. I am old enough to remember the area in its heyday with the Romany Cafe, dozens of coaches parked on the east side of the car park, and dozens of cars parked on the west side of the car park, both local and holidaymakers. The area has suffered from a series of blows over the years. Obviously, the downturn in tourism, plus a few years ago now, the area was closed for the best part of 6 months to take the French nuclear power cable to Guernsey, so there was a lot of disruption there. But we got around it, sir. I say I have no problem whatsoever in supporting this. I wouldn't say it's going to revitalise tourism, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. We did the same thing with, obviously, the Plymouth Holiday Village, and this, I think, would help reinvigorate Greve de Lake. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Conor Talbot St Mary.
Thank you, sir. If I could go back just a step, I well remember rumours circulating that the cafe was for sale, and I do find it surprising that government at the time wasn't aware of it. There was obviously great publicity when it was sold by the Lewis family. A planning application was made. There were representation was made to the states, and I remember well, and I hope the proposer will forgive me for mentioning it, that when he was Economic Development Minister, I remember having a conversation with him when he said he would actually not support the application for planning permission. That is not a criticism of the proposer, nor a criticism of the system. Planning decisions are made according to policy, and it's not for one individual politician to determine it. And the policy of the day was that it was capable of being passed, so it was passed. And thereafter, the matter has essentially been made redundant. And yes, it has certainly caused a blight on the local landscape. If we're looking at matters nostalgic, I remember I've been in the parish for over 30 years. There was a time when it was part of my Sunday morning routine to take my dog down to the beach along with my children and to have an unhealthy cooked breakfast afterwards. And I missed that. To go back there today, to their credit, last Sunday was actually Sea Sunday service. It's a service at the harbour shared by the parishes, by the churches of St Juan and St Mary. I couldn't unfortunately go myself, but the rector at St Juan added that on this occasion the owners of the cafe had agreed to make the car park available for those attending the service. I thank them for that. But on previous years when I've gone, and gone fairly early, there was no way at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning that I was able to park. And I make that point, sir, because this is not a facility just for the local parishioners of St Mary or St Juan. It is, I would say, its main users are certain communities from St Helier. When I put in objections at the time of the planning application, and I did, I heavily focused on the fact that that was not being NIMBY-ish for my own parish. It was the island as a whole that would suffer, and as indeed they have. So they are deprived from going there because there's nowhere to park. I suspect that local businesses are not able to operate as they would wish. And yes, some life of the area has gone out of it. So yes, I welcome the idea of the estates being able to purchase it. I think the main aspect is the car park, which was in the past kindly made available by the Lewis family to the public without charge. The rest of it, I am concerned that the states might be faced with the job of, and might well have to take the whole decision of buying the whole area, cafe, building site and all, but whether they would need all those to safeguard what is in the public interest, I'm not sure. And I hope that the proposition as prepared will allow sell-off of certain parts surplus to states' requirements. But certainly, sir, I do support in principle the idea of purchasing it. I had understood early after the election that there were certain talks in hand, and in that respect, I share Deputy Stevenson's view that it perhaps would be better if they'd been advanced without going public, in case that inflated the price. But we are where we are, as I say, sir, so yes, I will support it. The one concern I do have slightly is the new paragraph C about some form of requirement on owners to make government aware of particular sites. What is a particular site? On this occasion, sir, I believe it was pretty well known that the site was available. And if an estate agent has a property on its books and thinks he can get better value from one party, whether it be the states or others, surely it's incumbent upon them to notify us in any event. I will not vote against that aspect, but I think it is perhaps unnecessary. I would like to think that strict commercial decisions would mean that the state should always be aware of it in any event. So yes, sir, I will be supporting the proposition and hope that we have a happy outcome at a reasonable price. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir. And as a member of the Planning Committee that approved at a second attempt the current planning approval that we have on the site at Greve de Lec, I thought maybe we should go back and just for a moment consider where we are here, what we have, before we move to a vote on what might be the art of the possible. So we currently have a large car park which is not in use and not accessible to the public. We currently have buildings which are not in use. We currently have a cafe which is not in use and consequently not available to the public. However, and members may not know this, but we have an approved planning application to build a house. And with that approval comes public parking, comes abled and disabled access to a new cafe with views over and access to the beach. So there is already some public benefit, quite a lot of public benefit over and above what we have at Greve de Lec currently. I find myself looking at this proposition, sir, and asking the question, where would it stop if we approve this today? Will every beach in Jersey that enjoys a struggle with car parking at the height of the summer then get some sort of application for the states to buy a site alongside? We've had Portlet's been mentioned. Water's Edge Hotel, potentially, Le Coupon in Roselle, maybe some areas alongside Long Beach at Grooville, which is always a parking issue in the summer. And then I found myself thinking the other day, after I'd been to Pladouay Road and that great scheme which has just been approved for a dementia village there and some affordable housing. I found not affordable housing, but housing. I found myself thinking, did anybody in the States think about the site before the application came in for development? It sits immediately between a large chunk of affordable housing and Pladouay Road School. And wouldn't it make a fantastic opportunity to have increased the size of that school in an area where we know we're going to need more? Anyway, I'll leave that there. So the other thing I wanted to say, sir, is this debate reminds me very much of the Plemel debate. And so I'm going to bore those members that were there at the time with just a few seconds of a similar speech that I made in those days. Let's assume for an instance that this site might be £5 million. Members may not know, but I think next year there will be somewhere in the region of 1,000 verges of land which may not be farmed in the way we would expect it to next year. That land may be worth £9,000 or £10,000 a vergie, and for the same amount of money we could go out and buy 500 verges of land, cover it in trees and hedges and pollinators, and do some good for the climate, instead of purchasing the site, which already has some benefit of the public passed through the planning process. Instead, I fear, we may decide to purchase it so we can cover it in cars and people can travel out there burning more carbon. I just ask members to consider whether this is money well spent and a real benefit to the public of the island. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. So I'm working off my phone today, so I might need to squint a little bit. First of all, Deputy Farnham is correct that Greve does mean sandy shore. And I know that normally it's Deputy Ward who would do this kind of thing, but I'm sure that Deputy Farnham is hoping that today, on that sandy shore, that there'll always be something to remind him of this proposition today. And I don't think any reference to puppets on strings will work for this particular debate, but thankfully the second hit was also well known enough. So anyway, on to another point. It's an area of historic significance, of course. I think that I heard mention of a Martello Tower, and I'm sure the representatives of the area know that it's not a Martello Tower, it's a round tower. It's one of Governor Conway's first towers that he built, so in 1980. So there are some Martello Towers in Jersey, but that's not one of them. It's pre-Battle of Jersey, in fact, that coastal tower. Now, it's a shame that we weren't able to have a debate on the amendments, because I do have some concerns about some of the amendments that have been put forward and some of the potential within the amendments. The first one is that an alarm bell goes off when we hear the first amendment, which is to have potential partner organisations that we work with in this. And I think effectively what that means to me is not, of course you need partner organisations potentially to do the building, but I don't think that's what it means. It's sounding like we want to secure this area for the public. Well, first of all, up until now, it's already been a public area, so the status quo is that there's a public car park, and to be fair to Deputy Lucy, he's telling us that that's not going to change. So if the motivation for supporting this today is just to secure a public car park, we don't need to support this proposition to do that. I am coming round to supporting this proposition, incidentally, but I think it's important that we do it in a logical and considered manner. So we don't need to support this proposition simply to support access to the parking. There is a cafe there which I think people have, which is currently public, so although it's privately owned, it's a public facility. As soon as we start saying that even the best intentioned partnership, which could be a charitable organisation, that does great stuff for kids to access the beach, well, the children can already access the beach there. It's a public area. And any organisation that we put there then presumes some kind of exclusivity of use. So it doesn't become a public facility. It could actually become a well-meaning, charitable, exclusive use facility, which is not currently the case. So I think we need to potentially give both Deputy Farnham and Deputy Stevenson a steer as to what we would expect to go on the site. Because I think there's a strong coalition for the purchase of the site, but members of the public have lots of different reasons for wanting that. I'll give you an example. Somebody said to me, a friend of mine, I don't know what his politics are, but we're probably not completely aligned politically. And he said, I support the purchasing of Greve de Lec because we were up there the other day and we had trouble parking. And so there's an irony that he wants to be able to go out on a Sunday, whenever it is, with his friends and get access to parking there. And I think that's part of the motivation, is that people just want the status quo to remain. They're used to having a cafe at Greve de Lec, which you can drive into, park, and go and enjoy a cup of tea if you want to, or an ice cream. That's probably not going to be the case. I doubt that the States is going to pay. Let's be realistic here, and this is another point, is that there's no financial and manpower implications as far as I can see certainly on the amendment. It's very vague. I know that if one of us had submitted this as an amendment, and with those financial and staffing implications, that we would probably get pulled up on it. The reality is here, to secure this site, we're going to at least need to pay between £3 and £5 million. Because I think £3 million was the original sum that the purchaser paid for it before planning permission. If I'm wrong, people can speak later, but this is the ballpark figure that we're talking about to secure a site. So we do have to think about how would that money be spent if it wasn't spent on the purchase of this site? Because I know for sure that if it was one of us bringing the proposition to secure something in St Helier, let's call it a town park, and we were asking for £5 million to spend on it, government would be saying, no, we can't do that, I'm afraid, because we'd have to cut funding from somewhere else. But I guess it's different when it's your own constituency, isn't it, and when you are the government. So that's one rub, first of all. To ensure that negotiated price represents value for money and that prior to transaction being presented to the States, the price has been subject to independent assessment. There's no talk here about compulsory purchase. Now, when Plemont was on the table, and I know that Deputy Balash was a senator then, he was in the Assembly, we were on the same side of that boat, and it's something which he was happy to support. It did include a clause for compulsory purchase. And I know we haven't got a law officer, one of the Crown officers, to give legal advice today here, sir. Maybe he is listening somewhere. And I would want to ask the question about, is the States able does it have a mandate from this Assembly for that to include compulsory purchase? Because I know historically, States Assemblies have been very sceptical about using the ability of compulsory purchase in these issues. But it seems to me implicit that the government, if it wants to actually secure a best price, it needs to be able to not simply outbid other interested parties. And there will be other interested parties in this project, I'm sure of that, that we need to say, actually, we can compulsory purchase it. So I'm surprised that that's missing from the amendment. And it's probably because underlying ideology doesn't permit for that. I don't think this current Better Way constituency party would be happy to put a request in for compulsory purchase. It probably doesn't sit very well with their ideology. I don't have a problem with it. And the last part is, I think, getting towards something sensible. It talks in the amendment, it talks about considering options for the government to be notified when properties of areas of significant value come up for sale. The thing is, we do know when they come up for sale, because they're for sale, and they're usually, if they're in the public domain, we know about it. If they're not in the public domain, then how can we know about it? And the issue is we need to know about these things before they're up for sale. And in fact, what the government should be doing is looking for places that they can buy now, which are not only not for sale, but also are not up for planning applications. And I know this is something that the previous Environment Minister knew about, and we had conversations, he may have even said it in the Assembly, sir, is the concept of land banking. We live in an island where we're 9 by 5, where historically we've always been even prepared to reclaim land. But why would we reclaim land when we can simply purchase land? You know, purchasing land is so much easier than reclaiming it. And so these are some of the red flags that I have, is that when I look at what happened to the very valuable land on the waterfront, it was reclaimed, very expensive land. It was in public ownership. It was built on. We built offices for the private sector, and then we sold them to the private sector. So historically, governments have got a very good record of using public land and transferring it into private ownership for private benefit. And what we've got here is ostensibly is privately owned land, which is already in the public use, which has access, and we're saying buy it. And I'm very concerned about the partnership, like I said at the beginning, of that finding its way somehow into private ownership, because the government may want to, at some point in the future, transfer that. That said, I'm happy to support this. I don't know if I need to say anything in favour of the proposition, apart from the fact that as a socialist, I'm always happy to use taxpayers' money to buy up land for the public use. And I think we should do it more often. And if we need to use compulsory purchase for that, that's good. But why leave it at land? Why don't we also look at other things that are in the public interest? For example, it's probably in the public interest to have a ferry company, which we own. And if you're going to have a monopoly when it comes to ferries, or if you're going to have a monopoly when it comes to electricity, or a monopoly when it comes to gas, you know, maybe we should consider owning that as well. So I'd be interested to hear a bit more about the ideology behind this. Are other members comfortable about spending millions of pounds to acquire car parks? And maybe the last point, actually, it's the very last point, is that the irony hasn't been lost on me that we've just been debating parking in St Helier, saying people in St Helier in the future are going to have to get used to not having a car, but we're spending millions of pounds to buy a car park in the north of the island that people in St Helier are not going to be able to drive to because they don't have a car.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. One of the reasons I got into politics was a belief that if policies and legislation are correct, then sometimes they can be the best intervention that the state can make. We've grown weak in some ways, and we've become weak in applying our policies in how they should align to the wider function of the island. And we pick up the tab for this in many ways, often through spending on things we shouldn't need to spend on. Why do I say this? Why is this relevant, sir? The reason is we're debating the potential purchase of a site that for many years provided a shop, cafe, parking for patrons and for coaches. But of course this changed on the 13th of January 2022, when the then Planning Committee approved an application that I believe completely failed the planning policy of the day, the 2011 revised Bridging Island Plan, and would fail under the Bridging Island Plan 2022. So, sir, I would ask, given this proposition, where Deputy Farnham was on this day. Was he at the Planning Committee fighting the unjust application of policy the government set? Unless my memory and the Gref minutes of the meeting are mistaken, he wasn't. I know this as I was there, taking time out of my workday, fighting to use the policies that a former government here set to make the best use of the island's assets for the community. What policies are these? Well, given I don't like speaking at the committee before I got in, I wrote a speech for this one, so I've opened up my speech from 2022. And I can quote the policies that, if applied, would have come with an outcome more beneficial than the place we are today. Strategic Policy SP5, now SP6 in the Bridging Island Plan, is about economic growth and diversification. It's extremely clear, I say. A high priority will be given to the maintenance and diversification of the economy and support for new and existing businesses, particularly where development can attract small footprint, high value businesses from elsewhere and foster innovation in the following ways. The protection and maintenance of existing employment land and floor space should be retained for employment related use. That there is the first bullet point, and it says development should retain land and floor space. We know that car parking and buildings are considered employment land, and the committee has actually received advice to that effect. Policy E1 of the 2011 policy, the Bridging Island Plan, the 2011 Island Plan, was protection of employment land. Now, we've heard people going, wouldn't it be great if sites were marketed, if we had visibility? It's almost like the government of the day thought about that, and they thought, hang on a minute. There will be a presumption against the development which result in the loss of employment of land for employment use, as supported by Policy SP5, unless it is demonstrated that the site is inappropriate for any employment use to continue, having regard to market demand. Applications will need to be accompanied by documentary evidence that the size, configuration, access arrangements or other characteristics of the site make it unsuitable and financially unviable for any employment use. And, I put bold so I could make the point then and I'll make it now, confirmation by full and proper marketing of the site on terms that reflect the lawful use and condition of the premises. Back in 2021 and 22, the site, the Cafe Romany Seaside Cafe, was not put onto the open market. Thereby it failed the part of E1 that said, see if anybody else wants to run a cafe from there. See if anybody wants to turn it into a new surf school. We have policies and we fail to use them that enable the right function of the island plan of other policies for the benefit of the community. Now, I won't read more from there, but what I will say is in the minutes captured by the Estates Gref, who performed the function, the case officer confirmed that employment use would continue, albeit in a reduced form, and that significant wider benefits would arise. I would love if members of this assembly could stand up and tell me, when they look at the approved planning application, P 2021-0861, if you're looking for it, tell me what significant benefits arise from the development of a site that provides a large commercial function to one that has a large house and very small commercial function in the Coastal National Park. It says again, even the head of development of the day said that the committee had to balance the loss of employment land floor space and the significant gains which would arise. And I'm asking again, please tell me what these gains are. I will say Deputy Luce spoke. He actually was the one member who objected to this. I trust maybe he thought about the policies, and I thank him for applying them wisely. Sir, that the policy in which we actually form the value of land that we should be thinking about is, of course, the 2002 Island Planning and Building Law. The first article of that says, the purpose of this law is to conserve, protect and improve Jersey's natural beauty, natural resources and general amenities, its character and its physical natural environments. Accordingly, it is the intention of this law to ensure that when land is developed, the development is in accordance with the development plan that provides a clear, orderly, comprehensive and sustainable development of land in a manner that best serves the interest of the community. Now, we would not be having this debate if we had applied those, and like our debate on La Collette, what I would say is we have made mistakes in the past, and it is this Assembly to not make those mistakes in the future.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Sir, I do believe I probably did object to the development of the Grève de Lec site. And in fact, I lived in Grève de Lec for many years and saw many changes there whilst I lived there. And at that time, there was a place called Caesar's Palace before Fisherman's Wharf was developed. And I also saw how, sadly, fewer and fewer people saw this dance troupe that would entertain there every night, or most nights, because the coaches stopped coming, because the tourist scene changed and people weren't coming to the island because it was so much cheaper to go to Spain, where the weather was so much more reliable. And at the time that the Cafe Romany, the actual site, the development proposal came through, I spoke with many people trying to object to that because, you know what, the island plan policies were being applied. And what was actually being put forward by the developer was almost like a cutout model of what happened with the Wayside in St Brellard's Bay that I spent a lot of energy fighting. And basically the island plan policies were applied, because you know what, there are widely conflicting policies, as to quote the Minister for Environment again. That's not really changed in the island plan. And this is the thing, I personally understand and realise why the Cafe Romani just fell into disrepair and wasn't continued. It's the same thing as happened at the Zanzibar in St Brelade's Bay, because basically the market isn't there. So we come to the fact that this has happened. The site has gone, and it can it's allowed to be developed for luxury housing. Why is that? That's because of planning policy. And there are members of this chamber now who actually contributed to the development of the current Bridging Island plan. And indeed, one of them, the bringer of the proposition itself, Deputy Farnham, was Minister for the Economic Development at the time. And I contacted him to say, yeah, we've got this problem when it comes to tourist areas. We don't have proper policies to protect these areas. And indeed, I worked with Constable Jackson to try and bring in some sort of protection for the for St Brelade's Bay. It could have been a much wider policy, but I was finding that there was a lack of interest on the part of the Minister for Economic Development in terms of actually being more proactive in identifying areas that actually deserve to be protected as tourist development sites. I mean, no response to my emails. And then there's a mention, so basically I'm afraid I can't really support this proposition. And then even the bit that I'm told by my neighbour on the left could be regarded as a positive, to consider options consulting for enabling the government of Jersey to be notified where properties. Why aren't we doing this in advance? Now, Deputy Stevenson and Deputy Alex Curtis are assistant ministers of the Department for Economic Development. And that's bringing in developing a visitor strategy. You know what you could do in that? You could actually start coming up with some ideas about how that strategy will inform the bridging, the update of the Bridging Island plan. If your colleague, the Minister of Economic, the Minister for Environment, is truly going to commit to updating that plan, so to actually not kick it down the road, to actually bring in some policies that I recognise as planning, actual plans to preserve certain parts of the island for public use, for economic development, to actually not have housing policies trump them, as has happened time and time again, because economic development sites aren't being really valued. And yet you have to have some protection of these areas to allow new entrants to come in, because it's just too profitable for owners to say, oh yeah, we'll sell to Dandara and this has happened again and again. But who's learning from it? And Deputy Stevenson has also mentioned, well, maybe that one should create a fund. Do you know what? There was a fund. It was called the Tourist Infrastructure Fund. And who was actually managing it before in the last Estates Assembly? Well, that was the Minister for Economic Development. And what did much of that fund go on? To fund sports trips. And I actually did have a bit of discussion about him, about my disappointment about that. And he may remember what he said to me about that. But let's just say it wasn't particularly sympathetic. I think there was something about "you don't scare me, Moz," when I actually said, you know, we ought to look at how this was actually spent, because it wasn't really on tourist infrastructure. So I don't really have confidence in government buying this site, because I've seen how well it maintains its properties. Seen that, you know, Deputy Stevenson would like some sporting facilities to go back to Fort Regent. Well, yeah, we've seen what happened to Fort Regent. I did support Plymouth being bought more or less for the National Trust because I actually thought that was the best way to protect it. Don't give it to government. So I don't actually think this is the best proposal. I don't think that Little C actually is a way of really helping to identify sites that can be used for. We actually need a good, an overarching property strategy, perhaps like the one that the Public Accounts Committee has been trying to pursue for quite a few years now. I think there has been one, but it's a bit vague. And what we really do need actually is some real thinking, which I hope the Minister for Infrastructure will do, whilst developing this visitor visitor strategy that's to be developed by the Minister for Economic Development. And I really do hope it is something that equates to some real positive site identification and using the possibility of compulsory purchase powers, maybe. By the way, I love the way that Deputy Tadier talked about red flags. I thought that was that was a bit that did amuse me. And I really do plead with the Minister for Economic Development to actually do this, to actually make that Bridging Island Plan not a permanent plan, but actually accept it was a Bridging Island Plan, that we need a better island plan that really serves the public much better. And in the meantime, I regard this proposition as impractical, probably electioneering, and I would like to remind the bringer of the proposal of his attitude when I try to preserve sites for the public in a much more constructive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
So one can sometimes rely upon my good friend and former coalition partner, Deputy Luce, to enliven a debate. And he certainly has brought to mind the pain that he caused to Deputy Gorst and to me in the context of the first Plymouth debate, when he was arguing in favour of the construction of 27 houses on that headland, rather than its restoration to its natural state. I think there must be few people in the island now who would not think that the National Trust for Jersey has done the most marvellous job at Plymouth in the restoration which it has done, and that the £3 or so million of public money that was spent in that context was indeed very great value for money. In the context of Grave de Lec, it seemed to me that Deputy Stevenson put her finger on the pulse of the issue in saying that the construction of a large private house on the seashore in that environment would completely change the character of Grave de Lec and to its extreme detriment. I like Deputy Teddy, I think, and perhaps others, am slightly troubled by some of the amendments that the that Deputy mental blank, another good friend on the other side of the chamber, his proposition that he has accepted. I think that most people, most Jersey people would, if they were asked what they wanted to see happen at Grave de Lec, would be to say basically leave it as it is. I think actually that Amendment A does improve on that, and that it is possible to improve the environment in the sense of the cafe, which is not particularly beautiful, and indeed the car park, which I'm sure could be enhanced by appropriate planting and other environmental actions. I think the key must be that if members approve this proposition, that we wish to see some enhancement and betterment of the environment. And I'm confident that Deputy Stevenson and those with whom she is consulting will come back to the Assembly with something of which we can be proud.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Lehegarau.
Thank you, sir. I have real concerns, and my concerns are this. We have Fort Regent. We've now moved all the sports facilities out of it, and we have no money to do anything with it. This week we've talked about La Rocquiere School and the facilities that were supposed to be provided there for the east of the island. And hey presto, we have no money to afford it. So this is my question to the Treasury Minister: where is the money coming from? That's my biggest concern, sir. I was in the Treasury in 2014 when Plymouth was approved by this Assembly. And I won't say exactly what the people sitting behind me said, sir, but in a nutshell, they wondered where the money was coming from. And at that particular time, they found the money because they were building a new police station. So it came out of the COCF. However you marry that up, that's exactly what happened. And I would have supported Plymouth, 110%. And you know why? Because Jersey Heritage came to us and said, there's our plan, can you give us a grant for money? Oh yes, that's a great idea, because what we knew was that they would demolish all of the holiday camp. And I know better than most, standing here, I'm sure there's very few people in this room that spend more time out west as young people than I have. Because I spent 8 years of my life living just down the road from Gronay Castle, and then I moved slightly south to St Peter. So I'm very familiar with St Wands, as in Plymouth, and also, of course, Greve de Lec. Now, the thing is, one thing that everybody has missed, and do you know what? I didn't realise in all of that time, 28 years of my life, I never realised there's actually a house on that site. Nobody in this room has mentioned there is a house that was built in the 1930s on that site. It is there. Now, in 2022, the planning people actually had their display in the cafe showing everybody what was going to happen. So I actually took the liberty of trundling down there because at that stage, yes, you guessed it, I was on the planning committee. So I thought, well, I'm going to go and sneak in the back way while nobody's looking, and I'm going to see what's going on. So that's what I did. It also meant that there was other people around that I had the opportunity to speak to. Now, some lived in the bay and were quite happy, actually, with what they saw, because actually it does look quite nice. And some were actually totally opposed for it. Do you know what, though? Every single comment, mostly every single comment, is to do with parking. Nobody was concerned about anything else. It was all about, well, where are we going to park? Where are we going to park? And as somebody said, we've talked about parking all afternoon. Now, the thing is, when you then sort of say, OK, so there's the parking element. So, yes, we've already got a house built in the 1930s, and we've also got a bunker, which nobody's mentioned either. Now, when it came to the planning, and we all visited the site, what we were told, and I fully agree with what Deputy Curtis is, and he's far more on the policies than I am, I'll admit that. He looks at them far more religiously than I do. And sir, what I will do is, I'll give you all a pleasure. This is what we look at, because it's a very large book and he reads it far more than I do. The point is that there are policies, but some of them can always be subjective. So that's where we are, okay? So what was the planning committee seeing? What they were seeing was getting rid of what is an eyesore, as in the cafe, because what happened was on that 1930 building, they built an extension and they made a little cafe. Then they built another extension, and that's probably what Deputy Scott saw when she was living down there. It was built and built. And this humongous, horrendous tarmac car park. We don't have tourists like we used to. We don't have Tantivy coaches in droves going down. And I remember Caesar's Palace. I remember everything because I'm that old. The point is that all the comments, or most of them, were to do with parking. That isn't the issue here. It was private land, and I fully accept and understand that people will be aggrieved that they've no longer got parking. But they actually weren't supposed to park there, because it was quite clear on all the signage around there that said, you can park here if you're going to the cafe. Most people probably weren't going to the cafe, but the family never did anything about it. So anyway, here we come to the planning committee. And what was set before us, and yes, there are policies about employment land, but there is a cafe that's going back on that site. There is also a house. Now, okay, the footage of the house may be larger than what is already there, but they're actually going to rectify the bunker. They're going to make all of that look nicer, and they're reclaiming some of the sand dune. So in actual fact, when you look at it, it actually does look better. So the whole point is that when you look at all of these things in the planning terms, you look at what's presented by the officers within the department, and then you look at what, usually they've got planners as well, so their planners come along, and then you've got a look at all of those that oppose it. And now the opposing teams also have planners as well. So in actual fact, you then end up having to balance what you decide to do. And Deputy Luce, I think, was probably the only one that actually refused the application. And the rest of us looked at what we had in front of us and the policies that we had in front, and the access to the beach is better than what it is already. Not the parking, but the access to the beach, because they're making a better walkway to the beach. So from that perspective, I went with what the recommendations of the planning officer, and I would stand by that decision. Whether you might all think I was wrong, that's fine, because we all make decisions in life, and we make that decision today, and on hindsight, we might make a different decision tomorrow. But at the time, I thought that this was reasonable, and I still think that that was reasonable, because that was what was set in front of me. I don't particularly like the idea of large houses on the coast like that, and I fully agree with the one at Portlet, because actually you almost feel like you can't go there anymore, because there is a section of it that you actually can't get on. But that isn't the case here, because actually there's still going to be a cafe. So I'm not minded to support this, because I'm not happy with two things. A, I don't want this government or this Assembly buying more property that we're going to do nothing with, because I'm not being funny, we've done nothing with anything else, so I'm not confident that we'll do anything with this. And also, I'm not happy with it not coming back to this Assembly either, because part of that acceptance of the amendment says that everything will happen without it coming back here. The other thing I would also like to know, and maybe the proposer can actually clarify this, is it says that this isn't going to cost anything. Okay then, so who's going to negotiate for this site? Do we have people in the States, employees that can negotiate on our behalf? I doubt that very much. I don't know, because I assume that on normal cases, when we're actually asking to buy land or buying something, that somebody's negotiating on our behalf. So if somebody's negotiating on our behalf, and people keep pointing to the infrastructure minister, but I doubt that very much whether he's a qualified negotiator, because let's be fair, he's not a qualified negotiator for land transactions. Joking aside, who is going to pick up the bill for the qualified negotiated transactions? And I will not support this. I would support this. I would support buying this site if somebody comes back to me and says, here it is, this is what these people are going to do, let's give them a grant, let's pay for half of it or whatever, all of it, and I know that that's going to be knocked down and something better is coming back, because I'm not prepared to have another. I could stand here all day, sir, because there's St Saviour's Hospital, there's, Le Canavais School's being used a little bit now. We've got the Folly, okay, that's under Ports of Jersey, but let's be fair, that's us as well. We have got so many sites across the island which we do absolutely nothing with. I think to ask the public of Jersey to spend another £5+ million, I think is actually really quite naughty of us, really, to actually ask them to do that when we haven't actually got a proper plan. And finally, I do still speak to people that live at Swans, because half my relatives still live there. Not everybody thinks we should be paying this kind of money for a car park? Because unfortunately, sir, this is my real dread. I don't want to see a car park. I want that tarmac all dug up, quite honestly. I want to see a nice open site. Yes, great idea if Deputy Stevenson's idea of getting something there, but of course remembering what Deputy Tadje said, I don't want this an exclusive club for anybody. If it's going to be bought by us, then it's for use by all of us, not just the privileged few, because we do have things that still happen like that. But also, as I said, for me, I don't want to see this as a car park. That's not the reason, because actually, from St Wan's Parish Hall, there is a very good bus, I'm told, and there's also some parking. So let's be fair, we can't only do something to build a car park for people to have access. How many days a year is it sunny? When did all of us last go on the beach? And I'll leave it with that, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatable St Clement.
Thank you, sir. I must stop doing this because I'm most uncomfortable. Sir, before we spend £5 million on anything, I suggest we contact Doctor Who and make him an offer for his TARDIS. Then we can all go back in time and we can right every wrong that we've ever done in the States Assembly, going from now all the way backwards. Where is the Doctor right now? Well, I'm reliably informed he's in 1066, trying to prevent an arrow piercing King Harold's eye. If he's successful, I think the good gentleman over there will tell us that our whole world will change. We don't have these opportunities very often, and I think it's incumbent on us to protect our small island, which is only 9 by 5, for eternity. And this is the situation we're in. Folks, I've written 3 words down. It helps me prompt because I sometimes stop and stammer and forget where I am. Secure, control, and example. We have an opportunity now to secure this area, which is a beautiful area, for eternity. It's incumbent on us, on behalf of our 108, soon to be 150,000 people, we're told, to look after pieces of the island which we cherish. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Further than that, we can control what happens to it in the future. For eternity. It will belong to us. We're not saying that we're going to pay £5 million. We're not saying that it'll be taken. But we have an opportunity. The other situation is I'm very happy with all elements of this potential legislation, particularly C, because my 3rd word, example, is that it offers an example for the future to do things right. Protect those little pockets of our island that we cherish, use them wisely. We have potential partners, we're told. Use them. A lot of our problems and opportunities have been missed because we've had so many dialogues on Fort Regent. I personally have attended 3 workshops over 25 years about Fort Regent, and nothing's happened because we're not using the right people and we're not going into the right partnerships. But we have an opportunity to go into these partnerships and do it now. And so therefore, I mean, I do get the dilemma between 500 verges of trees, etc., etc. I think we should do both. I don't think Deputy Lewis should be worried that we've got £5 million and should we spend it on it. I think we should do the lot. So I'm very comfortable with all elements of this proposition, and I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I think we should take it in both hands and go forward. Thanks very much, sir.
Thank you, Conatable. Mr. Attorney, in your absence, there was a question asked about compulsory purchase. Do you want to respond to that question?
Yes, sir. Yes, I believe Deputy Tadje asked if there was a requirement in the proposition to refer to a compulsory purchase under the Compulsory Purchase Law of 1961 in the proposition as amended. And my answer, sir, is no, there isn't that requirement in this case because the proposition as amended refers to the Treasury and Resources Minister ensuring that the negotiated price represents value for money and that prior to the transaction being presented to the states in accordance with Standing Order 168, the price has been subject to independent assessment. So, sir, the property in this case is on the open market. It is for sale. There is a willing seller, and Standing Order 168 provides that the prior agreement of the States Assembly is not required for the purchase if the action is recommended by a body established by the states to manage land and buildings owned by the Public of Jersey, and the recommendation is accepted by the Minister for Infrastructure. So the transaction could proceed without the approval of or the agreement of the states. However, Standing Order 168 also provides that the Minister for Infrastructure must, at least 15 working days before any transaction for the purchase of this land is made, he must present to the states a document setting out the recommendation which has been provided by the body established to manage land and buildings. So he must lodge that with the states a minimum of 15 days before the proposed transaction. And it's at that point that the States Assembly might decide to call the transaction in for debate. So my advice in summary is that the proposition doesn't need to include reference to a purchase proceeding under the compulsory purchase law.
Thank you. Lady Miller.
So I'm just wondering if I could perhaps ask a further question of the Attorney General, because the propositions, the amendment, as amended, the proposition says to ensure that the negotiated price represents value for money and that the price is then subject to independent assessment. Now, if the Treasury Minister, having had his hand forced, let's say, to negotiate a price, which immediately puts him on the back foot in terms of the negotiation, if he feels the price does not represent value for money, and particularly, and I have, in the last few years, have argued in court several times that a valuation is nothing more than an opinion, and what matters is the price at which the parties agree to a sale. If the Minister is not satisfied that the price is value for money, and if the independent assessment also says the price is not value for money, what do we then do?
Yes, Mr. Attorney.
Well, in those circumstances, sir, the purchase couldn't proceed. If the obligation is on the Minister to ensure that the negotiated price represents value for money, and he's or she isn't satisfied that the transaction does, then the transaction couldn't proceed. And it may be that the Minister would choose to bring this matter back to the States Assembly in order to get the States Assembly's view. And I think, sir, that's all I could say in these circumstances.
So can I just thank the Attorney General? I did hear what he said. I've thanked him privately, but I was listening outside and didn't want to come back in whilst he was speaking.
Thank you. Conor St Brelard.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of brief points. Others have elaborated more fully, but I'm discomforted with this proposition for a couple of reasons. One is that I don't think spending, I don't know, 5 million, is it, on a project such as this is a good look from the public point of view. There are far more urgent things to be spent on, if you like, in terms of health and support of the community in general. And secondly, sir, as has been alluded to by others, what are we going to do with it? The track record of property holdings, with all due respect to the Minister in charge, is not good. We look at car parks, we look at roads administered by property holdings, and we're talking about a car park here, and I'd say in the main, sir, they're pretty poor. And I would rather 5 million was spent on maintaining the existing stock than enlarging the portfolio with something which is probably not going to be well maintained in the future. Deputy Lehegara pointed out that the plans on the table at the moment don't seem unreasonable. The world has moved on. The demand for parking Cafe Romani style has probably gone, and the proposed cafe with small amount of parking seems to be the right sort of thing in a bay such as Greve de Lec. I believe, sir, that the proposals could actually enhance the bay. It's a special area, there's no question about that. Do we actually need to own it? I think not, sir. So I don't think I can support the proposition as laid out presently. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor. Does any member wish to speak on this proposition?
Thank you, sir. So I'm fully supportive of the principle that the former Cafe Romani and car park at Greve de Lec should be purchased by the states and utilised for the benefit of the public. And I think the important part there is the benefit of the public. We see in the amendment that already that there's been talks, negotiations going on with a third party. And I think that if it's going to be bought for the public, it should be for the benefit of the public and not run as a private enterprise. And I think we should be looking to buy it. There's no reason why it's run successfully for years. I don't see any reason why we've got to spend a fortune on it. I mean, it needs refurbing. Somebody will certainly snap it up and run as a cafe, restaurant. I'm down there all the time, and the place is heaving with people all the time. We're getting permanent problems with, I know everyone's talking about car parking, but we are permanent problems with car parking. And I think it would be an asset to the island, it would be an asset to certainly St Wan's and St Mary's, and I'm fully supportive. But I would say that if we are successful in negotiating the price and the purchase of it, then contrary to what is suggested by Deputy Stevenson, that this should come back to the states, and we should then decide then how it's to be utilised. And then if there's been negotiations with a third party, which is noted as the Baudet Foundation, then we should know about what these are. Because what we don't want to see is, as somebody has suggested before, that we end up with a club, an expensive club, which is not for the benefit of the island. People want to go to the beach, they don't want to have to spend a fortune. Some of the facilities that this foundation run are very, very well organised, but very, very expensive, and I don't think it's for the benefit of the public. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Martin. Does any of them speak on this proposition? Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. And as many members have said, I wasn't intending to speak on this, but actually, Deputy Lehegara gave me quite a bit of food for thought. We tend to be on the same wavelength quite a bit, as we found. Perhaps not politically, but we do think similarly at some points. I think, given some of the reservations, and I am supportive of this proposition, but I'm also mindful that we haven't actually received an official government comments paper on it. And that seems to be quite unusual, given the cost involved and the potential impact. So I actually would like to hear more from ministers so that members that are concerned about this proposition can gain some level of assurance about the financing, the ability of the government to manage the site, and who will do any work entailed, because I do share, I think, the concern of Deputy Lehegara that potentially we could end up with the site being worse than it could be, and I think we need some comfort that it is the intention of the government to maintain this site for public use. I also think, in fairness, if it had been any other one of us, other than an assistant minister that had brought the amendment, and I say this with in mind that, of course, the amendment from Deputy Stevenson was brought in her own name rather than the Council of Ministers. And I'm conscious that the Code of Conduct for the Council of Ministers does ask members of the Council, of which Deputy Stevenson is, to bring potential Deputy Gorst is shaking his head. My understanding was that Deputy Stevenson did have a place around that table. She's okay. Yes, she is a member of the Council of Ministers. Maybe Deputy Gorst or one of the Council of Ministers could clarify. But my understanding is that members of the Council of Ministers should indeed bring potential propositions to the Council and offer it to the respective minister if they wish to bring it. So I am left wondering why the amendment itself wasn't a formal amendment from the Council of Ministers, and I'm also left wondering why we're lacking a formal comments paper from the government, either in support or not in support, or at least giving us some information about how the outcome of this proposition will be implemented, how it will be funded, and how we can ensure that the land will be safeguarded for the benefit of islanders. So I would urge ministers and assistant ministers to speak to this proposition and give members who are concerned about it some more assurance about what will happen should it be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Tom Binet.
Sir, I didn't really want to speak on this, but I note that it falls to Deputy Gorst and myself to try and make some sense of it. And I'd just like to point out to members that if we are sent into bat with the proposition as currently worded, if we vote for all three, I think we're put in an impossible situation, because we'll be going in to talk to an individual who's extremely commercially minded, no intention of becoming a philanthropist. We've told him that we're desperate to buy his property, and then once we go to the negotiating table, we've got to tell him that we've got to buy it at a price that represents value for money for us. So I think Deputy Haggerell might be right. I'm not the right person. I'm obviously not experienced enough to handle this sort of endeavour, and perhaps members might be minded to advise me how to go about that. I describe this as a complete dog's breakfast. It should never have come to the Assembly. I did ask Deputy Farnham not to bring it along, but I didn't really realise quite how complicated it was. Trying to make some sense of it, if I could suggest that we take it in three parts, and I'd recommend to members to perhaps vote for parts 1 and 3 and leave aside part 2, which requires the value for money. I think the best we can try and do, particularly, sorry, but being a sort of fairly commercially minded person myself, if I owned a property and I had people in the Assembly talking about compulsory purchase, it might make me look at my desire to sell a little bit more sharply. So on that basis, we could go forward and conduct a negotiation, see what price might be available, and then just bring that back to the Assembly to see whether that makes sense to them without the constraint of insisting that we have value for money in our terms. So I'm sorry I can't offer more than that, but I just think if we take things as they are, we're just going to go around in circles and we'll come back with nothing, and we'll waste the summer, and during that time somebody else might well have bought it. So I leave it there. I really don't know how to vote myself, but it's very confusing. But I think to try and make sense of it, 1 and 3, if people want us to come back with something, would put us in the best position to do so. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Gorst.
So I don't want to unnecessarily prolong the debate. I don't think there is a conflict, as some have perhaps indicated, between representing the 3 parishes of St Mary, St One, St Peter, and being Treasury Minister. I always wish to deliver value for money. That, as the previous speaker has just said, is challenging, but it really should be a marker from which any negotiation takes place. I am also on public record, as is the Chief Minister, of saying that in an ideal world, Deputy Farnham, having lodged his proposition, would then just have laid it to allow ministers to go away and have those negotiations unencumbered. But we are having our debate today. We are getting towards the cut-off time. Although having said that, there might be another school of thought that says we just get on with the vote. It might be that he and I could have a conversation overnight and resolve that particular difficulty, because I think that many members have said they agree with the principle of negotiating for the site. The Infrastructure Minister is right to remind us that within his or the Environment Minister's arsenal is compulsory purchase. And I would see that there are a number of, how can I describe this, approaches that one could take to these conversations and to these negotiations without saying too much more than that in public. Nor would I, of course, want to say too much about money and the source of money for all of those reasons, because it is very important that if ministers are to do this work, that we are not restricted and we are not tied to a belief that there is just an endless purse of money, because there isn't. And it is right in everything that we do that we should seek to get value for money. So I support the principles. I disagree with the Infrastructure Minister. I think out of all of the members of this assembly, he is the very person to be able to negotiate such a thing because of his vast commercial experience. But he is right to say that it won't be straightforward and it will not be an easy task. That doesn't mean to say that the task should not be started upon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question for the Attorney General, which he may be able to ponder overnight, or he might be able to answer it now.
Yes.
It relates to paragraph A, sir, and I've been rereading paragraph A, wondering whether or not paragraph A allows for the option, because it says to negotiate the purchase of the former seaside cafe, etc., for a particular use, but it doesn't say explicitly that the negotiation of the purchase has to be for states' ownership. So is it possible that an interpretation of that paragraph could be that the states negotiate a purchase for a particular use, but that they don't have to be the ones actually owning the site, so they could facilitate a third party to purchase the site, given providing it's restricted to a particular use, or am I completely misreading that?
It says, Deputy, to negotiate on behalf of the states of Jersey the purchase.
But it's asking the Treasury and Resources Minister to do that on behalf of the states of Jersey, but it doesn't. I'm wondering whether it's implicit in that the ownership should be. I think the first reading.
I think it's express that there's a request on the part of the Minister to negotiate, but on behalf of the states of Jersey the purchase, so that the buyer would be the states of Jersey. That's the intention, I'm sure. Yes. Yes. If another member wishes to speak, I call upon Deputy Farnham. Oh, Deputy Reneth. Do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do.
Well, please, unless the adjournment's proposed.
So can I suggest that we continue till we finish if there's only one more speaker tonight?
Well, let's see how many more speakers there are. Deputy Reneth has said he wants to speak. Anyone else? Is there anyone else who wants to speak apart from Deputy Reneth? Yes, Deputy Reneth.
Thank you. I'm very sorry to give everyone to think they were racing away. I'll keep it brief if I can, but I do think it does raise some interesting questions which apply to my area. I was, along with Deputy Curtis, one of those who opposed the application in a previous life, we met actually for the first time at that planning policy meeting when I spoke and he spoke. And it's always depressing, of course, when you lose a thing like that, but maybe some good will come of it. And this debate is an interesting outcome of that, many steps removed. I would say that there are several points that arise in relation to points that people have made about the car park, for example. The car park actually have lost 60 places under the planning application that went ahead. And there weren't, in fact, enough spaces for the cafe that was proposed, never mind the visitors that would come to the beach. And I think that raises the question about what the purpose of this might be. Why might we want to own this site? And there are good reasons why we might want to own this site, and it is also about opportunity. We don't necessarily want to go around buying up loads of sites, although there are possibilities where we might want to do that. But there is an opportunity here, and so the question is, do we turn down the opportunity or not? The opportunity is there because the site is for sale. And I think for me, part C is the most important part of this because it is to consider options for how we might move in this area in the future. There have been many sites that have come up over the last few years where we've had to consider this kind of possibility, and we haven't always had the option to buy. So I think of it in terms of what the opportunity might be, and I'm pleased that the amendment from Deputy Stevenson mentions the possibility of community use and so on. I've always thought that when we have sites like this, they do offer opportunities for use that is useful for the public in specific ways, depending on the site. And you know, at St. One's we have El Tico with a surf shop next to it, and that combination works really well in terms of both being complementary to each other. At Greve de Lec, it's the centre for the island's co-steering industry, if such as it is, and the car park was used by the businesses that work there to offload all the equipment and so on. So there is a specific history there to a site that could be used with a cafe and a co-steering, a centre for coastal exploration, environmental education, and so on. So there is an opportunity. And that, I think, is the reason why I think it's a very, potentially a very exciting possibility. But the key issue it raises, which many people have raised, is about funding. And we do need to think about where we are going, do we have a policy and an idea for how we want to do strategic property purchases? And it wouldn't necessarily just relate to the countryside. Town could also benefit from strategic purchases, sites that we might want to buy for a youth club or for parking or for other things such as that, where we currently don't have that option. So it does feel to me that there is a wider opportunity here to think about how do we approach strategic land purchases. And I don't entirely agree with those who say because we've got an awful record of looking after some legacy properties, that doesn't mean to say that we cannot reinvigorate our property policy. And I know that the Minister for Infrastructure is very keen on looking at that. And that we should think about how we deal with that kind of issue. It's a missing tool in our arsenal, really, that we don't have the ability at the moment to very easily buy sites. We have a JDC who can develop sites we already own, and we have property holdings who manage sites that we already own. Is there some mechanism that we can come up with? It may involve property disposals in one area in order to fund purchases in another. I wouldn't want to commit to what that is at the moment, but I do think that that is something very worth considering. And so I do think that that part C and the amended proposition is helpful in that regard because it asks us to make those bigger questions. But we are at a very early stage. This proposition only sets in train a series of possibilities. I think on that basis I feel able to support it, but I do think there is an awful lot more that needs to be done to bring it into fruition. I'm sorry to have kept everyone from their tea.
Standing Order 47 does require me at this stage to invite members to decide whether you wish to continue or to adjourn. Does someone want to propose a continuance or adjournment?
I'd like to propose that, please, sir.
Continuance.
Because I think there's only one more speaker, and that's the person summing up. I think
Yes,
so.
is that seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to object or speak on that proposition? In that case, the Assembly will continue. And I invite Deputy Farnham to reply to the...
Thank you, sir, thanks to. Hope the Deputy of St Clements isn't going faster, because I'm not going to be long. The Constable, sir, Constable, beg your pardon. Thank all members who have spoken. I think we've had a good debate in a relatively short period of time, given the nature of the subject. I need to address one or two speakers. So first of all, the Constable of St Mary, whose parish this involves, questioned why the government did not know, sir, and the government did not know. I didn't know, government didn't know. I don't believe at the time the site was advertised for sale. And I mean, we have to remember that between 2020 and 2022, we're running through the pandemic, so I can't, and at stages in that, especially in 2020, we were working to put in place hundreds of millions of pounds worth of reserves because we didn't know what we were facing. So even if we had known, I'm not sure the purchase of this piece of land would have taken the same importance at that time, simply because of the unknown territory that we found ourselves in. And later on, so certainly if we would have found out, or if I would have found out as a member, I would have been prepared to act. Deputy Alex Curtis asked me why I wasn't at a planning meeting on the 13th of January 2022. So, well, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I have consulted my diary of the day, and my diary states that between 10 and 11 there was a target operating sports briefing for economic development ministers. At 11 o'clock, so there was a Council of Ministers meeting. At 12 o'clock, sir, I dealt with some oral questions, responses. There was also a States Members briefing on incapacity benefits. 1 o'clock, there was a regeneration steering group meeting. At 4 o'clock, States Members received a briefing on rehabilitation services, sir. And at 6 o'clock in the evening, there was a Council of Ministers meeting. So that's probably why I couldn't quite squeeze in the Planning Committee meeting, but I would have done if I could have, sir. And Deputy Scott recalls our lively conversations about that, but she is wrong, sir. I think she's wrong, because I said something along the lines of, "You don't scare me." Well, sir, she terrifies me. So if I did say that, it must have been in a moment of nerve, sir, or something. But we did have, I like to think, some productive conversations, and Deputy Scott has always been a proponent for tourism destination areas. We disagreed on the issue. We had some lively conversations there. Some of them ended abruptly, but we picked up shortly afterwards, and I respect her for that position. But I'm not going to go in and discuss the detail of those, the tourism destination area issues. But my department at the time, with the full backing of the assistant ministers, did put our views into the interim island plan against the policy which originally was in place to protect tourism areas to an extent that we felt was detrimental to the future of the industry. I do welcome Sir Philip's speech, and I have here the Sir Philip, Deputy Balash's speech. I have here, of course, the proposition he presented for the grant to the National Trust, which enabled I think it was just short of 8 million ultimately to be invested in Plemore, which is, as he said, and he summed it up perfectly, what a fantastic job National Trust have done with that, and how different it would be today had we have allowed 28 homes to be built there and not protected that important part of the island. And the financial investment, I mean, it's difficult to value pieces of land like this. As Councillor St Clement said, they come up very rarely, but it's difficult to value them. I think the Treasury Minister or the Infrastructure Minister, who is well versed in land transactions and property negotiations, I can't think of anyone else better to send into bat, sir, than the Infrastructure Minister to come back, and I'm sure he'd come back with a really good deal for us, but he must come back with the best possible deal to the Assembly, and ultimately the Assembly will make the decision, and that's the time, I think, the opportunity to come back with some plans. And there has to be some really good opportunities to do something really special with this piece of land. I think, sir, that it is, although privately owned, Café Romanek Greftelec, together with its large car park, sir, has become a de facto public amenity that brought a great deal of structure and continuity to the Bay, and we miss it. We all miss it. The Bay misses it. The businesses miss it. The users miss it, sir. And I think without doubt, it has changed the whole character of the Bay, sir. And what concerns me, whilst we talk about these things, and talk is cheap, we talk about this, meanwhile the property and the land is on the market for sale. And I'm sure that a good deal for the people of Jersey can be struck if we get on with it. And that's why I brought this proposition. I know Deputy Stevens and Deputy Binet and other members have been talking about this. The desire from us all, I think, is to acquire this and do the right thing with this. And we have a great opportunity to perhaps, learn from what we've lost in the past and get hold of this piece of land and actually let this new Assembly, elected by a new electoral system, then show the people of Jersey that we can do something really positive and really good when we turn our mind to it, sir. I could go on. There's lots to say and discuss, but I think it's clear this proposition simply asks in good faith for the government to go out and negotiate the purchase of this valuable piece of land, sir, for the benefit of the people of Jersey, and come back to us with a good deal, sir, that we can approve. And then, sir, we can spend the time to make sure we do what's right for Jersey and what's right for the people. Thank you, sir. I am pleased to bring this proposition, and I ask for the appeal.
Deputy, do you want to have separate votes on A, B and C or not? It's a matter for you, it's your proposition.
I think, sir, I would propose to take it en bloc.
It's your proposition.
Thank you.
Well, it's been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce the proposition has been adopted. 32 votes for, 10 votes contra, and 1 abstention.
May we have the 10-1, please, sir?
Yes.
Those voting contre, the Conotabs of St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, Deputies Luce, Lahegara, Ayer, Scott and Miller, and Deputy Tom Binet abstained.
That concludes the public business of this meeting, and I'm about the chair of PPC to propose the arrangement of business for future meetings.
Thank you, sir. The arrangement of public business. At the moment, there are only 7 items lodged for the next sitting on the 12th of September. We've not yet reached the lodging deadlines for the next meeting, so it's very likely that other items will be added to the arrangement of business. Members, however, should be mindful of the continuation days that have been set aside. I propose the arrangement of business.
So,
Yes. Deputy Miller first.
Sorry, sir, I just wondered if I could ask a very quick question of the chair of the PPC. Given some of the debate we've had today about absences, my recollection is that the dates for this year were set quite close towards the end of last year, and I was wondering if PPC could consider bringing dates for next year's meetings forward, perhaps by September, because lots of us, particularly people with children, like to book the travel quite far in advance. I think there's no reason why we shouldn't know next year's sitting sooner rather than later.
Before the other questions for you, Deputy Rob Ward?
So it wasn't to be business, but I would like to say something afterwards about the next sitting in the CPA AGM, actually, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for the Chair of PPC? No? Yes.
I can confirm this at the PPC meeting on Monday. We discussed the dates for the next sittings, and so they will be released very shortly. Thank you.
Very much. Is the proposal for public business seconded? Members content to adopt the proposition of the Chair of PPC? Yes, Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I would just like to inform members that the plan is for September the 13th to be the AGM for the CPA AGM, and it would be very, very good to see all members attend for some short presentations of the work that's been going on. We also have, we hope, a presentation from a young person who went to the Youth Parliament, represented Jersey absolutely brilliantly, and come along and listen to her speak. I think it's really quite inspirational, and I would recommend. And further details of what we'll be planning to do will be emailed to you shortly. So if you could put aside 13th of September after the sitting in your diaries, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, sir.
Anything else to be raised? Well, I do hope that members have a chance to enjoy some time off over the summer, a brief time to down tools, but not, of course, any buckets and spades, as they'll be required on the beach. The state's adjourned until the 12th of September at 9:30. I wasn't keen to get out. I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression.